Welcome, friend, to another adventure together. Tonight we journey through soft secrets of Zen masters, ancient keys they created to still the troubled mind and discover deep clarity. Please do tell me what time it is and where you are listening. I am on the verge of sharing a set of precious and soft Zen tales. One with a little-known truth about freeing the mind from its self-imposed prisons of unease, overthinking, and discontent. They are more than just bedtime stories. They are transferals of wisdom, whispers from enlightened minds who found a core secret. Real rest isn't something you reach. It's something you discover in the path. The venerable Zen master Dogen taught, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. Tonight, we will see how these timeless tales guide us to gently forget the self that frets and strains. As these ageless tales are told, you might notice a subtle change within. The din of the day will start to subside. The burden you've been carrying will no longer seem so heavy. You will be directed toward a natural state of profound awareness and restful tranquility. So permit yourself to get settled in now. Release the day. Breathe slowly, deep. And as you exhale, open your mind to accept the truth that has traversed centuries to reach you here in this moment. Let us start our journey with a parable of compassion and the weight we tend to put on ourselves. This is the weight of the world. In a serene monastery, surrounded by rolling green hills, a young monk named Kenji resided with sincerity of heart and open mind. He would each morning get up before the light of day to meditate, and each evening take a walk around the monastery grounds in quiet reflection. His commitment to practice was apparent to all who knew him, but something vexed his heart profoundly. Every day, as Kenji listened to the news from the world outside or heard travelers mention faraway anguish, his heart became more burdensome. Foreign wars burned. Starving children existed in villages close by. Illness swept through towns, and cruelty seemed to thrive wherever he turned. The heaviness of it all crushed him beneath its weight, like an impenetrable mountain, rendering every breath a struggle, much less the serenity his practice held out as its promise. One morning, unable to endure it any further, Kenji went to his master, Rashi Tanaka, who was taking care of the tiny monastery garden. The old teacher strode slowly among the vegetables, uprooting weeds with tender care, his gnarled hands gentle as he touched each plant. "Master," Kenji started, his words weighted with sorrow. "I sense the pain of all living things bearing down on my heart. I see the wars, the famine, the disease, and the constant cruelty that human beings exact on one another. This burden is suffocating me. How can I achieve peace when the world is covered in such despair? How can I remain in meditation when others suffer?" Master Tanaka glanced up from his radishes, his eyes warm but intense. Without saying a word, he motioned toward a great round river stone that rested along the garden path's edge. The stone was lovely in its simplicity, smooth to a finish by millennia of water and wind, but it was obviously extremely heavy. "Pick it up," the master said softly. Although confused, Kenji complied. He stooped and with great effort picked up the stone. It was even heavier than it looked, and his muscles creaked under its load. His back started to hurt almost at once. Now, Master Tanaka resumed his weeding. "Carry it around for the remainder of the day. Do not lay it aside. Bring it to meditation, to food, to your work, to your rest. Make it your constant friend." Kenji obeyed, though he questioned the purpose. He carried the stone with him everywhere during that entire day. At morning meditation, his arms shook with the labor of maintaining it. At meals, he was barely able to eat with the stone on his lap. In sweeping the temple floors, his motions were jerky and uncoordinated. By afternoon, his shoulders were screaming with agony. By evening, his whole body hurt, and he felt exhaustion wash over him. When the sun began to set, Kenji stumbled back to his master, white-faced with exhaustion, sweating on his forehead in the chilly evening air. "Master," he panted, fighting to get the words out, "I cannot bear it anymore. This stone is destroying my body and my mind. I think I shall fall down." Master Tanaka regarded him with limitless compassion, his eyes gentle with understanding. "Then set it down," he spoke softly. Kenji dropped the stone to the ground with a hard thud that sounded as if it reverberated throughout the still garden. Instantly, he felt a wash of deep relief. His shoulders sagged, his lungs expanded, and he felt like he might lift from the ground. The removal of that oppressive burden was a source of joy. Master Tanaka laid down his gardening shears and stood before his student. "The suffering of the world is like that stone," he said softly. "It is real, and it is heavy. Your sympathy is a beautiful and needed thing. Never lose it. But you are not called to bear the stone of all sorrow on your shoulders. You are called to look upon it, to comprehend its weight, to sense its reality profoundly, and then lay it down so that your hands will be free to assist where you are able." The Buddha once stated, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." This wisdom from centuries ago shines a light on something deeper about the essence of compassion and service. When we are bearing all the suffering in our hearts, we become too heavy to be of real assistance to anyone. Why do we so easily take up stones which are not ours to carry? Zen Buddhism identifies a number of tendencies in our conditioned minds that give rise to this suffering. First is what we could term empathic overwhelm, the tendency to take on the pain around us until we ourselves are frozen by its scope. Second is the ego desire to be the fixer, a quiet spiritual pride in feeling we should be able to mend all hurts. Third is our challenge in discriminating between useful concern and abusive worry, between co-suffering and compassion. Real compassion, the type that benefits, involves what Zen terms emotional non-attachment, not becoming a cold, unfeeling person, but having the ability to feel intensely without being engulfed, to respond creatively without being overwhelmed. As a physician might heal a patient's injury without assuming their suffering, we learn to serve from a position of clear seeing, not emotional fusion. Think about your life. How many times do you scroll through news feeds consuming story after story of tragedy and injustice until you feel helpless and drained? How often do you assume the emotional loads of family, friends, or even strangers and bear their pain as your own? With each act, we add a stone, and with each stone we add, we weaken our ability to act with meaning. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This kind paradox works wonderfully well for our relationship with suffering. We are just as we need to be, and we can develop in wisdom about how to assist skillfully. The gain is not in having more stones, but in becoming aware of when to pick them up and when to put them down. The discipline of loving non-attachment is instituted by understanding the distinction between response and reaction. When we react to pain, we tend to take it in, duplicating pain and not generating solutions. When we respond, we have sufficient clarity and emotional equilibrium to do something beneficial. This could involve giving to good causes we believe in, giving time and expertise, or merely a sympathetic word to someone who needs it. Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never decreases by being shared. If we keep our own inner light and do not extinguish it by lugging around stones, then we become light sources for others. Our peace is a gift to a world in turmoil. Our clarity, a guiding light for those who are lost in confusion. Tonight, when you become conscious of the many stones you might be carrying, concerns about world happenings you cannot change, emotional loads that are not yours, or the load of trying to repair what is not yours to repair, can you sense the liberation of putting them down? Can you differentiate between caring and carrying, between compassion and co-suffering? As the Buddha instructed, your job is to find out what is your work, and then with your whole heart to give yourself to it. When we release ourselves from carrying stones that are not ours, we become free to take up the tools which are, and to serve the world from strength instead of depletion. As we continue our journey into the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us look at a story about recognition and the reality of value. This is the stone mind. A young monk, Hogen, had journeyed far from home over mountains and rivers to the great monastery in China, where the wise master Joshu taught. Hogen had heard tales of this master, how learners from around the known world came to study at his feet, and how even a single sentence from Joshu could ignite illumination in an open heart. When Hogen arrived at the monastery, he dove headlong into the daily regimen with boundless energy. He got up early to meditate, worked hard in the gardens and kitchens, studied the old scriptures with fervent intensity, and sat up late nights, reflecting on the Dharma talks he had attended. Day after day, week after week, he persisted in this intense practice, waiting eagerly for some acknowledgement from the master. But months went by, and Master Joshu didn't seem to notice him at all. In group lessons, the master's eyes would glide over Hogen as though he were not there. When Hogen posed questions in Dharma talks, Joshu would respond curtly and shift to other students. No private interviews, no personalized orders, no recognition of his commitment or advancement. Other students, some of whom had come after Hogen, appeared to get more attention, more advice, more of the master's valuable time. With the passing of the seasons, Hogen's early excitement started to turn into frustration and self-doubt. He saw the master hold lengthy conversations with some disciples, provide detailed instruction to others, and even eat with a few select individuals. Hogen, by contrast, felt more and more invisible, as if his very presence contributed nothing to the life of the monastery. His mind started to construct elaborate fantasies about his own unworthiness. Or maybe he was not clever enough for Joshu's teachings. Or maybe his training previously had not been complete. Or maybe he just did not have some vital spiritual quality that the other students did. The more he watched and contrasted, the worse he felt. Finally, finding he could no longer endure the feeling of insignificance, Hogen went to Master Joshu in the garden, where the old teacher was sitting silently amidst the morning flowers. The master's demeanor was as calm as ever, his mind concentrated entirely on the exercise of mere breathing. "Master," Hogen started, his tone heavy with disappointment and wounded pride, "I have been here for many months, studying with total devotion. I have worked to be a good student, to walk the way in faithfulness, but you have offered me no individual guidance, no special counseling, no acknowledgement of my efforts. I am nothing more than a useless stone lying in this monastery courtyard, forgotten. As it is obvious that I am of no worth here, I have made up my mind to leave and seek instruction elsewhere." Master Joash glanced up slowly, his ancient eyes glinting with something that could have been humor. He stared at Hogan for a very long time, then waved a hand around the courtyard where they sat. Smooth stones of all sizes lay in neat patterns, forming paths and borders, supporting walls and laying the groundwork for garden walls. "You tell me that you are a worthless stone," Joash said quietly. "Tell me, do you notice those other stones located in the courtyard here?" "Yes, Master," Hogan replied, unsure where this was going. "Do you rest upon them when you want to rest?" the Master questioned. "No, Master," Hogan replied, confused. "Do you push them around when they annoy you? Do you kick them when you're upset? Do you expect them to change their color or shape to your liking?" "No, Master. Of course not," Hogan replied, starting to get a sense that something deep was being exposed, but not yet understanding what it was. Master Joshu smiled kindly, his lined face wrinkling with empathy. "Examine these stones a little more closely. This whole monastery is built on them. They demand nothing, no commendation, no notice, no special care. They are not admired for their work. Still, they hold everything up. The meditation hall remains due to them. The kitchen is working due to them. The paths in the garden are there due to them. Without these quiet stones, this whole holy place would collapse." He stopped, letting his words take root in Hogan's perception like seeds sown in good earth. "You claim to be a stone," Joshu went on. "If you knew what it is to be a stone, to hold up without expectation of reward, to serve without calling for thanks, to be so firmly rooted in such deep stability that others can base their practice on your existence, you would already be enlightened." Hogan's mind popped open like an egg at that point. He realized in an instant how his endless searching for attention, his craving for validation, his yearning to be special had been the very barriers keeping him from being what he already was. As the rocks underfoot, he had been holding up the monastery family all along with his genuine effort, his unobtrusive energy, his plain commitment to the way. Buddha's teaching reminds us, 3 things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. The deeper lesson here teaches us that our true value does not lie in being seen or favored. Like the rocks that hold up the monastery, our value is not in being observed, but in our very ability to hold up and carry what is important. Why do we fight so strongly with the desire for recognition? Zen Buddhism identifies a number of levels of conditioning which create this pattern. The first is what we can refer to as ego hunger, the perception of isolated self that repeatedly looks for assurance of its existence and significance in forms of external validation. This hunger can never be filled because it's rooted in the perception that we are isolated entities vying for scarce attention and approval. Second is our conditioning within culture concerning achievement and specialness. Starting early in life, we are conditioned to gauge our worth by grades, awards, compliments, and relative success. This conditioning is so embedded that it often gets transferred to spiritual practice also, unconsciously seeking enlightenment as yet another achievement instead of seeing it as who we are in our natural state. Third is our challenge to differentiate between healthy humility and spiritual materialism, the delicate manner in which we can use even the deepest practices as chances to promote our ego. We desire to be regarded as good meditators, dedicated students, or enlightened beings, neglecting the irony that real awakening involves the melting away of the one who wishes to awaken. Look to your own experience. How frequently do you find yourself craving recognition at work, wishing your efforts to be valued by members of your family, or seeking acknowledgement of your input to neighborhood projects? Observe the underlying tension that comes when others are praised for what you believe they should have been praised for, or when your efforts are ignored while someone else is praised. This mind of seeking produces boundless suffering because it makes our peace and self-value dependent on other people's notice and affirmation. As Hogan in the tale, we may use tremendous effort to get attention while neglecting the deep value of what we simply by being here and authentic. Zen teacher Dogen wrote, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." This forgetting doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to care about our actions. Rather, it means releasing our attachment to being seen as special or different, allowing us to serve from a place of natural fullness rather than ego-driven emptiness. The stone mind is the Buddhist concept of beginner's mind, the capacity to be ordinary, to serve without ceremony, to be present with such deep stability that other people can count on us. It doesn't mean settling for less or concealing our gifts. It means presenting them freely without expectation of how they will be received. On a practical level, developing stone mind involves practicing what Zen teaches as just sitting in everyday life. When we work, we just work completely without looking for approbation. When we listen to friends, we listen all the way without having to be heard to be good listeners. When we meditate, we just meditate without holding on to exceptional experiences or wisdom. Tonight, as you examine the ways you may be looking for approval or feeling undervalued, can you feel the release that comes from letting go of needing to be special? Can you sense the organic dignity that arises when you cease to act for approval and instead give your gifts like stones beneath a temple? As the Buddha also said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The deepest teachings tend to come not from seekers who want to shine, but from those who, like stones, bear the whole with quiet strength and unwavering presence. Let us now consider a tale of identity and the masks we wear for various roles. This is the governor's visit. In the old capital of Kyoto, where cherry blossoms rimmed the rivers and traditional temples stood cheek by jowl with crowded market streets, there was a man who occupied one of the most important jobs in the land. Governor Nakamura had charge of the welfare of thousands of subjects, the enforcement of imperial decrees, and the maintenance of order in his huge province. Formal ceremonies, weighty decisions, and reception of other officials who used flowing titles and bending inclinations occupied his days. It was both an honor and a burden to bear such a responsibility. Each morning, servants dressed him in the softest silk robes, appropriate to his station. Each interaction was run through layers of formality and political calculation. Each sentence spoken was precisely weighed for its possible effect on his reputation and effectiveness. He was Your Excellency, Honorable Governor, Lord Nakamura, titles that reverberated both above and apart from ordinary human contact. Although worldly successful, Governor Nakamura increasingly felt hollow in the heart. The official routines, the perpetual acting of power, and the aloofness that his office had come to stand between him and other people made him yearn for something real. He had heard of a Zen master by the name of Kyu, whose teaching was supposed to pierce all facade and address itself directly to human nature. After months of reflection, the governor made up his mind to find this teacher. On a still morning, Governor Nakamura approached Master Kaiu's humble hermitage at the edge of the city. He was accompanied by his customary retinue of attendants and guards, as was the custom. His rich silk robes rustled against each other as he walked, and his official seal caught the morning sun. Following proper etiquette, the governor's chief attendant approached the hermitage first to announce his master's arrival. The attendant knocked respectfully on the simple wooden door, and when Master Kaiu appeared, bowed deeply. "Honored Master," the attendant declared with formal precision, "Your Lordship, the finest governor of this province, judge of imperial justice, guardian of the people, has arrived to solicit your guidance. He humbly requests to see you." Master Kaiu, a tiny old man in plain brown robes, heard this grand introduction without a flicker of expression. When the attendant had finished speaking, the master gazed up serenely and responded without hesitation, "I have nothing to do with such an individual. These titles are useless to me. Have him go away." The attendant's face grew red with confusion and embarrassment. Never in his years of service had anyone ever refused to see the governor. He went back to where Governor Nakamura stood, his head hung in shame as he delivered the master's words. But rather than feeling insulted or angry, something shifted within the governor's consciousness. In that moment of rejection, he recognized something profound. The master had not rejected him personally. He had rejected the elaborate facade of titles and positions that separated human beings from authentic encounter. Governor Nakamura understood immediately what was required. He turned to his attendants and guards, dismissing them with gentle words. He removed his ornate outer robes, leaving only simple undergarments. He washed the formal cosmetics from his face and tied back his hair in a simple style. Then, alone and unadorned, he approached the hermitage again. This time he knocked on the door himself. When Master Kaiu appeared, the man formerly known as Your Excellency bowed humbly and spoke in a quiet, personal voice that had not been heard by others in years. "Master," he said simply, "I am Daido. I have come seeking guidance on the path to understanding. Would you be willing to speak with me?" Upon hearing this humble introduction, using his personal given name rather than his governmental title, Master Kaiu's stern expression immediately transformed into a warm, welcoming smile. His eyes crinkled with genuine delight, and he opened his arms in a gesture of embrace. "Ah, Daido," he exclaimed with evident joy. "Please come in immediately. I have been hoping to meet you. Let us sit together and share tea while we speak of the Dharma." The transformation in the master's reception was complete and immediate. Where moments before there had been cold rejection of pompous formality, now there was warm welcome for authentic humanity. As the Buddha observed, however many holy words you read, however many you speak, what good will they do you if you do not act upon them? What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the difference between our essential nature and the roles we play in the world. Why do we become so identified with our social roles and titles that we lose touch with our authentic selves? Zen Buddhism reveals several layers of conditioning that create this pattern. First is what we might call role identification, the gradual process by which we begin to believe that we are the positions we hold rather than human beings temporarily filling those positions. Over time, we can become so merged with our professional identities, family roles, or social status that we forget the simple person beneath all the layers. Second is our society's emphasis on hierarchical recognition. We learn early that certain titles, achievements, and positions command respect and attention. This conditioning can become so strong that we unconsciously believe our worth as human beings is tied to these external markers of success. We begin to introduce ourselves through our accomplishments rather than our essence. Third is what Zen calls face-saving, our attachment to maintaining a particular image or reputation. The more invested we become in how others perceive our roles, the more rigid and defensive we become about maintaining those personas. We build elaborate walls of formality and protocol that, while perhaps necessary for certain functions, can isolate us from genuine human connection. Consider your own life. Notice how differently you feel and behave when you're at work versus at home, versus with close friends. While some adaptation to context is natural and appropriate, where might you be hiding behind professional titles, social roles, or family positions in ways that prevent others from knowing who you really are? This pattern shows up in subtle ways throughout our daily interactions. We might introduce ourselves as Dr. Smith rather than Mary, emphasizing credentials over personhood. We might interact with service workers differently when we're dressed professionally versus casually. We might find ourselves speaking differently when we're in positions of authority versus when we're asking for help. The teaching here isn't that social roles are inherently problematic. Governments need governors. Hospitals need doctors. Families need parents. Rather, it's about maintaining awareness of the difference between the temporary roles we play and our enduring humanity. Master Kyo wasn't rejecting governance or suggesting that social organization is worthless. He was pointing to the spiritual danger of becoming so identified with external roles that we lose access to our authentic selves. Zen teacher Alan Watts wrote, "We are living in a culture entirely hypnotized by the illusion of time." We might add that we're also hypnotized by the illusion of fixed identity. We believe we are our job titles, our relationship roles, our social positions, when in reality these are simply temporary costumes we wear while playing our parts in the human drama. The practice of what we might call essential meeting involves learning to recognize and connect with the fundamental personhood in ourselves and others, regardless of the roles and titles that might be present in the interaction. This doesn't mean ignoring appropriate social protocols or abandoning professional boundaries. Rather, it means maintaining awareness of the human being who exists both within and beyond these structures. When Governor Nakamura became simply Daido, he didn't lose his governmental responsibilities or his capacity to serve his province effectively. Instead, he gained access to wisdom and connection that could actually enhance his service by grounding it in genuine humanity rather than mere authority. Tonight, as you reflect on the various roles and identities you carry throughout your day, can you sense the simple person who exists beneath all the titles and positions? Can you imagine what it might feel like to meet others and be met from this place of essential humanity, rather than through the filters of social hierarchy? As the Buddha taught, in the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. The titles and positions we hold are among the things we must ultimately let go of. But the love and gentleness we bring to our roles, these arise from our authentic nature and remain with us always. Now let us turn to a story about letting go and the unexpected freedom that comes through loss. This is no water, no moon. Sister Shiono had been practicing Zen meditation for many years at a mountain monastery where the air was thin and pure. and the silence broken only by the sound of wind through pine trees. She was known among her fellow practitioners for her sincere dedication, her disciplined daily routine, and her genuine desire to awaken to truth. Each morning before dawn, she would sit in meditation. Each day she would work mindfully in the monastery gardens or kitchen. Each evening she would study the ancient texts and contemplate the Dharma talks of her teacher. Yet, despite years of earnest practice, despite countless hours of sitting meditation, despite her careful attention to every aspect of the monastic life, enlightenment seemed to elude her. She had studied all the classic koans, memorized the essential sutras, and could discuss Buddhist philosophy with considerable sophistication. But the direct, unmistakable realization that her teachers spoke of, that sudden recognition of her true nature, remained beyond her grasp. Other students in the monastery had experienced breakthrough moments. She had witnessed the joy and transformation that came over their faces when understanding dawned. She had heard their expressions of gratitude to the teacher and their descriptions of seeing reality with completely fresh eyes. Yet, for Chiano, practice remained effortful, understanding remained intellectual, and the promised liberation remained a concept rather than a living reality. As seasons passed and years accumulated, Chiano began to feel a subtle desperation creeping into her practice. She increased her meditation time, hoping that more hours of sitting would force the breakthrough she sought. She analyzed her approach, wondering if she was doing something wrong, missing some crucial instruction, or lacking some essential capacity for awakening. The harder she tried to grasp enlightenment, the more distant it seemed to become. One evening in late autumn, after a particularly long day of intensive meditation retreat, Chiano felt exhausted in both body and spirit. The monastery had provided water for evening tea, and she had filled an old bamboo bucket from the well. The bucket was a beautiful thing in its simplicity, woven from strips of bamboo that had been carefully bound together with natural fibers. It had served the monastery community for many years, bearing countless gallons of water from the well to the kitchen. As Chiano carried the full bucket back toward the monastery buildings, she noticed how perfectly the full moon was reflected in the still water's surface. The reflection was so clear and complete that for a moment she paused to admire its beauty. The silvery light seemed to dance gently as she walked, creating a moving meditation on the relationship between reality and reflection, between the actual moon above and its image below. But the old bucket had reached the end of its useful life. The bamboo strips had dried and loosened over years of use, and the binding fibers had gradually weakened. As Chiano walked slowly back through the moonlit courtyard, absorbed in watching the moon's reflection shimmer in the water, the inevitable happened. Suddenly, without warning, the bottom of the bucket gave way completely. The bamboo strips separated, the bindings snapped, and the bucket simply fell apart in her hands. In an instant, the water rushed out onto the stone path, splashing her robes and disappearing into the spaces between the courtyard stones. With the water gone, the moon's reflection vanished as completely as if it had never existed. In that moment of unexpected loss, watching the water disappear, seeing the moon's reflection vanish, feeling the solid bucket dissolve into separate pieces in her hands, something profound shifted in Chiano's consciousness. The very thing she had been grasping for so desperately, the enlightenment she had been trying to achieve through years of effortful practice, suddenly revealed itself in the complete letting go. She understood in a flash of recognition that was more certain than anything she had ever known intellectually. The enlightenment she had been seeking was like the moon's reflection in water. beautiful, compelling, but ultimately a reflection of something that was already present. When she stopped trying to hold on to the reflection, when the container of her grasping mind fell apart like the old bucket, what remained was not the image of awakeness, but awake awareness itself. Standing in the moonlit courtyard, with broken bamboo strips in her hands, and water soaking into the earth at her feet, Shiano began to laugh. The sound echoed off the monastery walls, a sound of profound relief and joy. That night, she composed a poem to capture her realization. With this and that, I tried to keep the pail together, and then the bottom fell out. Where there is no water, there is no moon in the water. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, you are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement. This tale unveils the paradox at the heart of all spiritual seeking. The more desperately we grasp for awakening, the more we reinforce the very sense of separation that awakening dissolves. Why do we struggle so intensely with letting go, even when holding on causes suffering? Zen Buddhism points to several deep patterns in our conditioned consciousness. First is what we might call attainment mind, the belief that peace, happiness, or fulfillment exists somewhere other than where we are right now. This creates endless seeking, constantly reaching toward a future state while missing the completeness of present experience. Second is our attachment to method and technique, like Chiano, trying to keep the bucket together with this and that. We often become so focused on our spiritual practices, our meditation techniques, our philosophical understanding, that we mistake the finger pointing at the moon for the moon itself. The practices become another form of grasping rather than opportunities for letting go. Third is what Zen calls Buddha sickness, becoming attached to the very idea of enlightenment, making it into another object to be obtained, rather than recognizing it as the very awareness that is already seeking. We create elaborate mental constructions about what awakening should look like, how it should feel, what abilities it might bring, and then spend years trying to achieve our own concepts. Consider your own experience with seeking, whether for spiritual understanding, professional success, relationship satisfaction, or personal happiness. Notice how the intensity of wanting often seems to push away what we're reaching for. The job interview goes better when we're not desperate for the position. Relationships flow more naturally when we're not clinging to particular outcomes. Even simple activities like trying to remember a forgotten name work better when we stop efforting and let the answer arise naturally. This principle applies profoundly to spiritual practice. The awakening that traditions like Zen point toward is not a state to be achieved, but the very awareness in which all states arise and pass away. It's not something we can grasp because it's what we already are. It's not somewhere we can go because it's where we already are. The moon's reflection in Shia's bucket represents all the spiritual experiences, insights, and states of consciousness that we might collect during practice. These can be beautiful and meaningful, but they are reflections of reality rather than reality itself. When we mistake them for the goal, we become like someone trying to catch the moon by grasping its reflection in water. Zen teacher Shanryu Suzuki said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." Shiano's breakthrough came not through accumulating more spiritual knowledge or developing more sophisticated techniques, but through the complete collapse of her efforts to keep the pail together. When her expert mind, with all its strategies, expectations, and spiritual ambitions fell apart like the old bucket, what remained was the simple awareness that had been present all along. The practice suggested by the story is not to stop meditating or abandon sincere spiritual effort, but to hold all practice lightly. We can sit in meditation without grasping for special experiences. We can study wisdom teachings without trying to collect insights like trophies. We can engage in spiritual community without comparing our progress to others. Most importantly, we can begin to notice when we're trying to keep the pail together, when we're efforting to maintain particular states of mind, forcing spiritual experiences, or grasping for future attainment. In those moments, we can practice what Zen calls just sitting, simply being present without agenda, allowing whatever arises to arise and pass away naturally. Tonight, as you consider what you might be trying to grasp or achieve in your own life, can you sense the relief that might come with letting the bottom fall out? What would remain if you stopped trying to hold together your concepts about who you should be, what you should accomplish, or what your life should look like? As the Buddha taught, letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness. True freedom comes not from getting what we want, but from releasing our attachment to wanting itself. When the water spills and the reflection disappears, what remains is the moon itself, luminous, complete, and closer than we ever imagined. Let us explore a story about the extraordinary nature of ordinary life. This is the real miracle. Master Bankei was renowned throughout Japan for his direct and uncompromising approach to Zen teaching. Unlike many teachers who relied on elaborate rituals, complex philosophical discussions, or dramatic demonstrations of spiritual power, Bankei had a gift for pointing people toward the simple truth that was already present in their immediate experience. His monastery attracted students from many different Buddhist schools, as well as curious visitors who had heard stories of his unconventional wisdom. One day, a practitioner from another Buddhist lineage came to visit Bankei's monastery. This visitor had spent years following a teacher who was famous for his supernatural abilities and miraculous powers. He had witnessed his master perform seemingly impossible feats, healing the sick with a touch, manifesting objects from empty air, and demonstrating psychic abilities that defied ordinary understanding. These experiences had filled the visitor with tremendous reverence for the spiritual path and confidence in his teacher's realization. During the evening Dharma talk, as Master Bankei sat quietly before the assembled community, the visitor could not contain his excitement about sharing the miraculous abilities of his own teacher. When the formal talk concluded, and time was given for questions, the visitor stood up eagerly. "Master Bankei," he began, his voice filled with admiration and perhaps a hint of challenge, "I must tell you about my teacher's extraordinary powers. Our founder was a truly great man, a living saint who could perform the most amazing miracles. Just last month, I witnessed him write a holy name through the air, across a wide river, and the sacred characters appeared blazing in the sky for all to see. The entire village was filled with wonder and devotion. Can you perform such miraculous feats? Do you have powers like this to demonstrate the depth of your realization?" The visitor sat down, clearly expecting to be impressed by Bankei's response, perhaps hoping to witness some supernatural demonstration, or at least hear descriptions of equally marvelous abilities. The other students in the hall turned their attention to their teacher, curious how he would respond to this implicit challenge. Master Bankei remained completely still for several moments, his expression neither defensive nor dismissive, but simply present and attentive. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and matter-of-fact, without any trace of competition or superiority. Perhaps your teacher can indeed perform that kind of miracle. Bankei said calmly, I do not doubt what you have witnessed, and I have no criticism of such demonstrations. But I must tell you honestly, that is not my way. Such powers do not interest me, and I do not cultivate them. The visitor looked somewhat disappointed and pressed further. But Master, if you cannot perform such wonders, what then distinguishes your teaching? What is your miracle? How do we know that you have achieved genuine realization? Master Bankei's eyes twinkled with the kind of gentle humor that often accompanies profound truth. He looked directly at his questioner with complete sincerity and replied, My miracle is this. When I feel hungry, I eat. When I feel thirsty, I drink. When I am tired, I sleep. When spring comes, I notice the flowers blooming. When winter arrives, I observe the snow falling. This is my miracle, to be completely present for the simple reality of each moment. The hall fell into deep silence as the implications of this teaching settled into the awareness of everyone present. The visitor who had come expecting supernatural demonstrations found himself confronted with something far more challenging. The invitation to recognize the miraculous nature of his own immediate experience. The Buddha taught there are only two mistakes one can make along the road to truth: not going all the way and not starting. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing that the miracle we seek is not hidden in extraordinary demonstrations, but reveals itself in the complete embrace of ordinary experience. Why do we overlook the miraculous nature of our everyday existence? Zen Buddhism reveals several layers of conditioning that blind us to what is always already present. First is what we might call spiritual materialism, the unconscious belief that enlightenment must be dramatic, supernatural, or visibly impressive. We imagine that awakened consciousness should produce extraordinary powers, mystical visions, or at least some obvious signs that distinguish the enlightened from the ordinary. Second is our habituation to the familiar. The mind tends to dismiss as mundane precisely those experiences that are most constantly available: breathing, seeing, tasting, feeling, the simple fact of awareness itself. We become so accustomed to these fundamental miracles that we stop recognizing them as miracles at all. It's as if we're fish who have forgotten the water we swim in. Third is our cultural conditioning toward complexity and achievement. We live in a society that values the rare, the difficult, the spectacular. This conditioning seeps into our spiritual seeking, making us believe that profound truth must be complicated, esoteric, or accessible only through years of specialized training. The possibility that ultimate reality might be as simple as feeling hungry and eating challenges our entire framework of how spiritual accomplishment should look. Consider your own experience right now as you engage with these words. Notice the miracle of vision, how marks on a page or patterns of light on a screen somehow transform into meaning in your consciousness. Observe the mystery of understanding, how abstract concepts arise in awareness without any effort on your part. Feel the rhythm of breathing that continues without your direction, the beating of your heart that sustains life moment by moment. These experiences are so ordinary that we typically ignore them completely, yet each one represents a profound mystery that no science can fully explain. How does consciousness arise from matter? How does awareness recognize itself? How does meaning emerge from pattern? These are questions that point to the miraculous nature of the most basic aspects of existence. Master Bankei's miracle of eating when hungry and drinking when thirsty points to what Zen calls natural functioning, the spontaneous responsiveness of awakened consciousness to the needs of each moment. This doesn't mean being reactive or impulsive, but rather developing such intimate attunement to present reality that appropriate action arises naturally without the interference of excessive thinking, second-guessing, or spiritual ambition. Zen teacher Dogen wrote, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things." When we stop trying to be spiritual in some special way, when we abandon the search for extraordinary experiences, we become available to be completely present for the myriad small miracles that make up each day. This teaching doesn't diminish the value of dedicated practice, intensive meditation, or sincere study of wisdom traditions. Rather, it points to the ultimate goal of all such practices, not to achieve supernatural powers or accumulate spiritual experiences, but to become so naturally responsive to reality that our actions flow effortlessly from clear seeing rather than from ego-driven seeking. The miracle of eating when hungry extends to every aspect of daily life. It means speaking when speech is called for, and remaining silent when words would be unnecessary. It means working with full attention when work is required, and resting completely when rest is needed. It means feeling emotions fully as they arise without either suppressing them or being overwhelmed by them. In practical terms, cultivating appreciation for ordinary miracles begins with what Zen calls beginner's mind, approaching familiar experiences with fresh attention, as if encountering them for the first time. Try eating a meal with complete presence, noticing not just the flavors, but the incredible coordination of sensory experience, memory, and pleasure that makes eating possible. Pay attention to a conversation with a friend, marveling at the mysterious process by which thoughts in one mind somehow communicate themselves to another. Notice the miracle of sleep, how consciousness dissolves each night and reconstitutes itself each morning. Observe the daily resurrection of awareness from the small death of unconsciousness. Watch how dreams arise from nowhere and return to nowhere, creating entire worlds that seem completely real while we're experiencing them. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, can you recognize the miracle in this simple transition from waking to sleeping? Can you feel the extraordinary in the ordinary rhythm of your breath, the weight of your body settling into stillness, the natural release of the day's activities and concerns? As the Buddha taught, if you truly loved yourself, you would never harm yourself with negative thoughts. The deepest expression of self-love might be the simple appreciation for the miracle of your own existence, not the idealized version of yourself you might become, but the breathing, feeling, aware being you already are. True miracles are not violations of natural law, but recognitions of the natural law of consciousness itself. The mysterious fact that the universe has somehow awakened to itself through your eyes, experiences itself through your senses, and knows itself through your awareness. When you eat because you're hungry, you participate in the cosmic miracle of life sustaining itself. This is miracle, and it is yours as well. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the most fundamental truth that surrounds us yet remains invisible. This is the tale of the fish and the ocean. In the vast depths of the Pacific, where sunlight filtered down through layers of blue and green and coral gardens swayed in gentle currents, a young fish swam restlessly through familiar waters. Despite being surrounded by the wonder of ocean life, schools of silver fish moving like liquid metal, sea anemones dancing in the current, and the rhythmic pulse of waves far above. The young fish felt troubled by a persistent question. One day, approaching an ancient sea turtle whose shell bore the scars and wisdom of countless journeys, the young fish asked earnestly, "Elder, I keep hearing other sea creatures talk about something they call the ocean. They speak of it with such reverence, as if it's the most important thing in existence. But I've searched everywhere, and I cannot find this ocean anywhere. What exactly is this mysterious thing everyone talks about?" The old turtle's eyes, deep and patient like tidal pools, regarded the young fish with gentle amusement. "Little one," the turtle replied in a voice worn smooth by decades of storms and calms, "the ocean is this very thing that surrounds you on all sides at every moment." The young fish looked around frantically, darting left and right, swimming up toward the distant surface and down toward the sandy bottom. "But I don't see anything surrounding me. There's nothing here but water and fish and plants and rocks. Where is this ocean you speak of? Why can't I see it?" The turtle settled more comfortably on a bed of soft kelp, understanding that this was a teaching moment that required patience. "Of course, you cannot see it, young friend," the turtle explained. "The ocean is both inside and outside of you. You were born in the ocean. You breathe the ocean. You are nourished by the ocean. And one day you will return to the ocean. The ocean flows through your gills and around your body just as naturally as your own scales cover your skin. It is so much a part of you that it has become invisible." The young fish paused, beginning to sense something vast and fundamental that had been present all along, but remained unnamed. "You mean this water I swim through is the ocean?" "Yes," the turtle confirmed. "You have never been separate from it, not for a single moment of your existence. As the Buddha observed, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with awareness." This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with the Tao, the fundamental flow of existence that permeates everything, yet remains largely unnoticed in our daily lives. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual blindness. Like the fish who cannot see the ocean, we live immersed in the sacred, but fail to recognize it because it is too close, too constant, too fundamental to our existence to register as separate from ourselves. Why do we struggle to perceive the Tao, this universal flow that sustains and surrounds us? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of seeking the extraordinary while overlooking the ordinary. We imagine that spiritual truth must be dramatic, mystical, or separate from everyday experience. We look for God in burning bushes while missing the divine presence in morning coffee, in the breath entering our lungs, in the simple fact of awareness itself. The Tao expresses itself in everything we encounter: the changing seasons, the cycles of sleep and waking, the rhythm of our heartbeat, the way thoughts arise and dissolve in consciousness. It is the organizing principle behind both the spiral of galaxies and the unfurling of fern leaves, the same pattern expressing itself at every scale of existence. Consider how often throughout your day you might glimpse this underlying flow without recognizing it. The way traffic naturally organizes itself, despite having no central controller. The way conversations find their own rhythm and timing. The way your body breathes without conscious direction. The way solutions to problems seem to emerge from somewhere beyond deliberate thinking. These are all expressions of the Tao working through apparent chaos to create spontaneous order. Zen teacher Alan Watts taught, Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The Tao is similar. It cannot be grasped or contained because we are expressions of it rather than separate observers of it. Every attempt to understand the toe through conceptual thinking is like the fish trying to get outside the ocean to examine it objectively. This doesn't mean the toe is merely a philosophical concept. It is the most practical and immediate reality, the intelligence that coordinates the trillions of cells in your body, the awareness in which all thoughts and sensations appear, the life force that animates everything from redwood trees to bacteria. In Chinese philosophy, the character for Tol literally means the way or the path. But this is not a path we walk towards some distant destination. It is the path that walks itself through us. The way reality unfolds moment by moment without requiring our management or control. Laro wrote, "The toe that can be spoken is not the eternal toe." Yet here we are using words to point towards something beyond words. This is the beautiful paradox of spiritual teaching. We must use the limited to point towards the unlimited, knowing that the finger pointing at the moon is never the moon itself. Tonight, as you feel the breath moving in and out of your body without your conscious control, can you sense the Tao expressing itself through this simple miracle? Can you recognize in this automatic process the same intelligence that moves the planets and changes the seasons? The Buddha taught, "Look within. Thou art the Buddha." You are not separate from the ocean of existence any more than a wave is separate from the sea. In recognizing this fundamental non-separation, we stop seeking the Tao and begin living as its conscious expression. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about contentment and the nature of desire. This is the stone cutter's journey. High in the mountain villages, there lived a simple stone cutter who had discovered the secret of happiness without knowing it. Each dawn he would climb winding paths to the quarries, his tools balanced across his shoulders. As he worked among the stones, he would sing old mountain songs that echoed across the valleys. Though he was poor by society's measures, living in a modest hut with few possessions, the stone cutter desired nothing more than what he had. His simple life felt complete. The rhythm of his work, the beauty of the mountains, the satisfaction of honest labor. His heart held not a care in the world. One day, he was called to work on the grand mansion of a wealthy nobleman. As he approached the estate, his eyes widened at the magnificence before him. Marble columns reached toward the sky. Gardens sprawled in perfect symmetry. For the first time in his life, the stone cutter felt the sharp pang of desire pierce his contentment. "If only I were rich," he sighed. "Then I would not have to earn my living in sweat and toil as I do now." To his amazement, a voice whispered from the stones, "Your wish has been granted. Henceforth, anything you desire will be given to you." He returned home that evening to find his humble hut replaced by a mansion as magnificent as the nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy, he abandoned his tools and began enjoying the luxurious life of the wealthy. But one hot afternoon, gazing from his ornate window, he saw the king's royal procession passing by. The monarch sat in cool shade, surrounded by noble men and servants, appearing serene and powerful above the common heat. "How I wish I were a king myself," he thought, and immediately found himself reclining in silk cushions within the royal carriage. But the carriage proved warmer than expected. Even through thick walls, the sun's heat penetrated relentlessly. "I wish I were the sun," he declared, and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe. As the sun, he felt magnificent and all-powerful until thick storm clouds gathered, completely blocking his rays. I wished to be a cloud, and so he became a massive storm cloud, glorying in his power to block the sun. But as he transformed into falling rain, he encountered an enormous rock that blocked his path completely. A mere rock more powerful than I. I wished to be a rock. Suddenly, he stood tall upon the mountainside, feeling he had achieved true permanence. But soon he heard chipping sounds at his base. Looking down, he saw a tiny human figure cutting chunks of stone away, a puny creature more powerful than me. I want to be a man again. And so he found himself once more a stone cutter, climbing familiar mountain paths. But now something had changed. As he shaped stones and felt mountain breezes, his heart swelled with deep contentment. His song returned richer than before, because he had learned to be content with exactly who he was. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment, the greatest wealth." This ancient wisdom illuminates the endless cycle of wanting that keeps us from recognizing the abundance already present in our lives. Why do we chase after different conditions, always believing happiness lies in the next transformation? Each desire, fulfilled only, reveals the next desire, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The stone cutter's journey reveals the futility of seeking happiness through external circumstances. Consider your own versions of this cycle. I'll be happy when I get promoted, only to discover new stresses. I'll be content with more money, only to find greater wealth brings new worries. Each achievement reveals the next mountain to climb. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of contentment, the ability to fully accept what is while still engaging wholeheartedly with life's natural changes. The stone cutter's final transformation wasn't into something greater, but into appreciation for what he had always been. His work remained the same, but his relationship to life was completely transformed. Contentment isn't found in having different experiences, but in bringing different awareness to whatever experiences arise. Tonight, as you notice the mind's habitual reaching toward what's not here, can you experiment with the stone cutter's final wisdom? Can you find the song that emerges when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are? As the Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth. Luxury is artificial poverty. The greatest transformation available isn't becoming something different, but recognizing the inherent completeness of what we already are. Our next story reveals the difference between knowledge and true awareness. This is the tale of the teacher who thought he had arrived. After a decade of intensive training under various masters, studying countless texts and dedicating himself wholly to Zen practice, a monk named Tenno finally achieved what he had long sought: recognition as a qualified teacher. His understanding of Buddhist philosophy was profound. His meditation practice was deep and stable, and his ability to guide others had been tested and approved. He received the formal acknowledgement that he was ready to teach the Dharma and help others along the path of awakening. Proud of his accomplishment and eager to learn from one of the most renowned masters of his time, Tenno decided to visit the famous Zen master Nan. The older teacher's reputation for wisdom and insight was legendary throughout the region, and Tenno looked forward to engaging in deep Dharma discussions. and perhaps receiving some final polishing of his understanding. It was a rainy day when Tenno made his pilgrimage to Nannin's temple. The roads were muddy and slippery. Puddles reflected the gray sky, and the steady rainfall required him to carry an umbrella to stay dry. When he reached the temple, he carefully removed his wooden clogs and placed them on the covered porch, along with his umbrella, just as custom dictated. He arranged his outer robes, composed himself properly, and entered the temple to meet the great master. Nannin received him graciously, bowing with the respect due to a fellow teacher while maintaining the dignity of his greater experience. They sat together in the simple receiving room, and Tenno expected their conversation to focus on sophisticated points of doctrine, subtle aspects of meditation technique, or perhaps the challenges of guiding students. Instead, after the initial pleasantries, Nannin asked what seemed like an absurdly mundane question. "I noticed you left your wooden clogs and umbrella on the porch when you entered. Tell me, did you place your umbrella to the left of your shoes or to the right?" Tenno was caught completely off guard. Of all the profound topics they could discuss, why was this renowned master asking about such a trivial detail? He tried to recall the moment he had arranged his belongings, but realized with growing dismay that he had no idea. He had been so focused on the importance of this meeting, so preoccupied with the impressive conversation he expected to have, that he had performed the simple act of arranging his belongings in complete unconsciousness. "I don't know," Tenno admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. In that moment of confession, the full implications of his ignorance became clear to him. Here he was, a certified teacher of mindfulness and awareness, and he couldn't even remember a simple action he had performed just minutes earlier. Nannin smiled with infinite compassion, not mockery. "Then you have not yet attained full awareness," he said gently. "Someone who is truly awake pays complete attention to every moment, every action, every detail of experience. The way you arrange your belongings reflects the same quality of attention you bring to meditation, to teaching, to all of life." In that instant, Tenno's pride in his accomplishments crumbled, replaced by a humbling recognition of how much deeper his practice needed to go. He understood that true awareness isn't something you achieve once and then possess forever. It's a quality of attention that must be cultivated and maintained in every single moment, in the most ordinary activities, as well as the most exalted spiritual practices. Without hesitation, Tenno requested to become Nannin's student. For the next 10 years, he studied under the master's guidance, learning to bring the same quality of conscious attention to placing his shoes that he brought to formal meditation, to treat the arrangement of an umbrella with the same reverence he showed to sacred texts. When he finally left Nannin's temple, he was a completely different kind of teacher, one who understood that enlightenment is not a destination but a way of traveling, not an achievement but a continuous practice of complete presence. As the Buddha observed, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true spiritual development is measured not by our peak experiences, but by the quality of attention we bring to ordinary moments. Why do we assume that enlightenment exists only in special circumstances, formal practices, or elevated states of consciousness? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is found precisely in our ability to be fully present for whatever is actually happening, whether it's sitting in meditation or simply placing an umbrella beside our shoes. Tenno's mistake was common among spiritual practitioners. He had developed the ability to be mindful during designated practice periods, but hadn't yet learned to extend that same quality of awareness to everyday activities. He could be present while sitting in meditation, but unconscious while performing simple tasks. This split between spiritual activities and ordinary activities is one of the most subtle traps on the path of awakening. We imagine that consciousness is something we turn on during meditation and turn off during mundane tasks. But true practice integrates awareness into every aspect of life. Consider your own daily routine. How present are you while brushing your teeth, making coffee, or putting on your shoes? Do you perform these activities with the same quality of attention you might bring to more important tasks? The gap between formal practice and informal practice often reveals where our awareness needs to deepen. Zen Master Dogen taught, "Practice and enlightenment are one." This means that the quality of consciousness we cultivate in any moment is both the path and the destination. There's no separation between developing awareness and being aware. Every moment offers a complete opportunity for awakening. Nanin's question wasn't about umbrellas and shoes. It was about whether Tenno's spiritual development had penetrated into the cellular level of his daily existence. Could he maintain the same presence while performing unconscious habits that he brought to conscious spiritual practice? The Buddha said, "Mindfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. Those who are mindful do not die. Those who are heedless are as if dead already." True aliveness is found in complete presence, and complete presence can be cultivated in any activity, no matter how simple or mundane. Look deeply at your own relationship between formal practice and daily life. Where do you treat certain activities as worthy of attention while others are performed on autopilot? This isn't about becoming obsessively focused on every tiny detail, but about recognizing that the same capacity for presence that serves us in meditation can transform every aspect of our lives. The paradox is that the most ordinary moments often offer the greatest opportunities for awakening. When we're sitting in formal meditation, we expect to be mindful. But when we're simply arranging our belongings or performing routine tasks, we have a chance to discover whether our practice has truly taken root or remains confined to special circumstances. In Zen temples, students are taught that washing dishes is as sacred as chanting sutras, that sweeping floors is as important as studying philosophy. This isn't because these activities are inherently special, but because the quality of consciousness we bring to any activity determines its spiritual value. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "Washing dishes is not only a way to have clean dishes, washing dishes is also a way to live fully in each moment." This points to the fundamental teaching that Nanan was offering Tenno. Every action is an opportunity to practice complete presence. The Master's question revealed that Tenno's decade of training had developed his capacity for awareness during designated practice periods, but hadn't yet integrated that awareness into the seamless flow of daily life. He could be conscious when he intended to be conscious, but he hadn't yet learned to make consciousness his default state. This integration is what distinguishes genuine spiritual maturity from mere spiritual knowledge. It's relatively easy to be mindful when we remember to be mindful. The deeper practice is developing the kind of natural awareness that operates whether we're thinking about it or not. Tonight, as you perform the simple actions that end your day, brushing your teeth, changing clothes, arranging items for tomorrow, can you bring the same quality of attention you might give to formal meditation? Can you discover whether your spiritual practice has penetrated into the unconscious habits that make up so much of daily life. Buddha's wisdom reminds us every moment is a teacher, and every place is a classroom. The umbrella beside the shoes was Tenno's teacher that day, revealing exactly where his practice needed to deepen. Sometimes the most profound lessons come disguised as the most ordinary questions asked by masters, wise enough to see that true awakening is found not in transcending the mundane, but in discovering the sacred hidden within it. Let us now turn to a tale about the thin boundary between heaven and hell within our own hearts. This is the story of the samurai and the gates in feudal Japan. A battle-hardened warrior named Nuiji sought out the renowned Zen master Hakuin. The samurai's armor bore the scars of countless conflicts, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too much violence. He approached the master's simple dwelling with a question that had been burning in his mind since his last campaign. "Master Hakuin," Nuager said, bowing stiffly in his heavy armor, "I have spent my life fighting for my lord, facing death countless times. Tell me truthfully, is there really a paradise and a hell awaiting us after death?" Hakuin looked up from his tea, studying the warrior with penetrating eyes. "Who are you to ask such a question?" he inquired calmly. "I am a samurai." "No," Maishi replied with pride, straightening his shoulders. "I serve my lord with honor and have never retreated from battle." Hakuin's expression suddenly shifted to one of disdain. "You a soldier?" he exclaimed with a dismissive laugh. "What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? Look at yourself. Your face looks like that of a common beggar, weathered and crude. How could someone so lowly claim to be a protector of nobility?" The words struck Nushiga like physical blows. His face flushed red with anger, and his hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword. The insult to his honor was unbearable. "So you have a sword," Hakuin continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your weapon is probably much too dull to cut off my head. I doubt you could slice through a rice paper screen, let alone defend anyone of importance." Unable to contain his rage any longer, Noiga began to draw his sword, the steel singing as it emerged from its scabbard. His entire body trembled with fury. His vision narrowed to focus solely on this insolent monk who dared to question his honor. At that precise moment, as the blade caught the afternoon light, Hakuin spoke with sudden clarity. "Here, open the gates of hell." The words pierced through Noiga's rage like an arrow finding its target. In that instant, he saw himself clearly consumed by anger, ready to kill over wounded pride, his mind clouded by fury. He understood that hell was not some distant realm, but the very state he inhabited in that moment. The samurai's hand froze on his sword as recognition dawned across his features. Slowly, with great reverence, Nubusha sheathed his sword and bowed deeply before the master. His anger transformed into profound gratitude. "Here open the gates of paradise," Hakuin said gently, his voice now filled with compassion. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is a startling revelation about the geography of our inner world. Heaven and hell are not distant destinations, but present moment experiences we create through the quality of our consciousness. Why do we so easily find ourselves at the gates of hell? Zen Buddhism points to the three poisons that cloud our minds: greed, hatred, and delusion. When Noiga's pride was wounded, hatred arose instantly, transforming a peaceful afternoon into a realm of suffering. His entire reality shifted from curiosity about the afterlife to murderous rage in mere moments. The deeper teaching here shows us that we carry within ourselves the capacity for both states. Paradise and hell are not places we go to after death. They are experiences we inhabit while living. Each moment offers us the choice between the hell of reactivity and the paradise of awareness. Consider how often throughout your day similar transformations occur. A critical email arrives, and suddenly your peaceful morning becomes a realm of anxiety and resentment. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and the spaciousness of your drive contracts into a tight knot of irritation. A thoughtless comment from a colleague, and your contentment dissolves into hurt feelings and defensive thoughts. In Zen practice, we cultivate the capacity to recognize these moments of transition. Like no bush drawing his sword, we learn to catch ourselves at the very moment we're about to enter hell through our reactions. This recognition itself becomes the key that opens the gates of paradise. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we're caught in reactivity, we're rejecting the present moment, the Master's teaching, the opportunity for awakening in favor of our thoughts about how things should be. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Hikuen's apparent insults were not cruelty, but compassion in disguise. By provoking Nushiger's anger so skillfully, he showed the warrior exactly what he needed to see. That hell is a state of mind we enter through our own choices. This teaching invites us to examine our own triggers. What words or situations instantly transport us to hell? Perhaps it's feeling unappreciated at work, being misunderstood by family, or facing unexpected challenges. Each of these experiences offers the same choice. No-faced, will we draw our sword or recognize the teaching tonight? As you notice irritation arising in response to some frustration, can you remember Hakuen's lesson? Can you recognize the moment when you're about to enter hell through your reactions, and instead choose the paradise of awareness? As the Buddha taught, what we think we become. In each moment, we are either opening the gates of hell through unconscious reactivity, or opening the gates of paradise through mindful presence. Let us now turn to a story about the relationship between outer circumstances and inner cultivation. This is the tale of the horse and the mind. In a remote mountain region where execution grounds served as sobering reminders of mortality, Zen Master Bankai sought to test the depth of his spiritual realization. For several nights, he sat in meditation beneath a wooden crucifix, using the proximity of death to penetrate more deeply into the nature of existence. After completing this intense retreat, Bankai made his way to a nearby area where he could rest. He found a peaceful spot on an embankment surrounding a horse corral, where he lay down to continue his contemplation under the open sky. As he rested there, absorbed in profound silence, a harsh sound shattered his peace. From within the corral came the violent sounds of a warrior brutally beating his horse. The animal's cries mixed with the sharp crack of a whip and angry shouts of a man losing control. Master Bank observed this scene with growing concern. The warrior was clearly frustrated, taking out his inner turmoil on the innocent animal. Each blow seemed to make the horse more agitated rather than more compliant, creating a vicious cycle of violence and resistance. Unable to remain silent, Bankai called out from his position, "Hey, what do you think you are doing?" The warrior, absorbed in rage, ignored the interruption and continued his harsh treatment. The beating intensified, and so did Bankai's concern for both the animal and the man degrading himself through such cruelty. "Hey!" Bank called out again, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years cultivating inner peace. "What do you think you are doing?" Still, the warrior continued, lost in frustration and anger. The horse became increasingly panicked, which only seemed to fuel the man's determination to force compliance through violence. This time, something in the master's tone penetrated the warrior's rage. The man stopped his beating, climbed down from his horse, and approached the embankment. As he drew closer, his expression changed. There was something about this stranger that commanded respect, a quality of presence that spoke of deep inner development. "You were yelling at me," the warrior said, his voice still carrying traces of anger, but now mixed with curiosity. "Do you have something to tell me?" Bank looked at the man with compassion, seeing not an enemy, but someone caught in the same cycles of frustration that trap us all. His response was simple yet profound. "Rather than beat your horse for being unruly, why not chastise yourself and train your own mind right?" The words hung in the air between them, like a bridge connecting two very different approaches to dealing with difficulty. The warrior had been trying to solve his problem through external force and control. Bankai was pointing to an entirely different possibility. As the Buddha observed, "Conquer anger with non-anger. Conquer badness with goodness. Conquer meanness with generosity. Conquer dishonesty with truth." This teaching captures the essence of what Bankai offered the frustrated warrior. The recognition that our external struggles mirror our internal state. What emerges from this story is the profound insight that we cannot successfully force the world to conform to our expectations through aggression or control. The warrior's approach, beating the horse into submission, represents how we often try to manage difficult circumstances in our own lives. We become frustrated with external conditions and respond with force, criticism, or manipulation, never recognizing that the real work lies within. Why do we instinctively blame external circumstances for our frustration? Buddhist psychology explains that the untrained mind seeks to maintain its comfort by controlling its environment rather than developing the flexibility to respond skillfully to whatever arises. This creates what Zen calls pushing the river, exhausting ourselves, trying to force reality to match our preferences. Consider how this pattern manifests in daily life. The computer that crashes during an important project becomes the target of our anger, when the real issue is our attachment to having technology work perfectly. The traffic jam that makes us late triggers road rage, when the actual problem is our expectation that travel should always be smooth. The family member who doesn't respond to our advice becomes the focus of our frustration, when the deeper issue is our need to control others' choices. In each case, we're like the warrior beating the horse, applying force to external circumstances while ignoring the internal conditions that create our suffering. The horse represents the uncontrollable aspects of life, other people's behavior, natural events, technological failures, and the inherent unpredictability of existence. Zen teacher Pema Chodon writes, "You are the sky. Everything else is just the weather." This points to the same truth. Bank offered the warrior, instead of trying to control the weather of external circumstances, we can develop the spacious awareness that remains calm regardless of conditions. The real training involves learning to work with our own minds rather than trying to force compliance from the world around us. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting harmful situations, but rather approaching challenges from a place of inner stability rather than reactive frustration. Buddhist practice offers specific techniques for this internal training. Mindfulness meditation teaches us to observe our reactive patterns without being swept away by them. Loving kindness practice develops compassion for ourselves and others when things don't go as planned. Contemplation of impermanence helps us accept the changeable nature of all conditions. Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable frustrations of daily life, can you remember Bankai's teaching? When you find yourself wanting to beat the horse of difficult circumstances, can you pause and ask, what would it mean to train my own mind instead? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. The path to peace lies not in conquering external conditions, but in cultivating the inner qualities that remain stable regardless of what the world presents. Let us continue our journey with a story about maintaining inner balance regardless of external circumstances. This is the teaching of Master Hakuin and the power of it as so. Master Hakuin lived in a small village where he was deeply respected for his wisdom, compassion, and exemplary character. For decades, he had maintained a reputation as a pure and enlightened teacher, someone who had transcended ordinary human weaknesses and embodied the highest spiritual ideals. Villagers often brought their problems to him, seeking guidance and inspiration from his teachings and his impeccable way of life. In this same village lived a beautiful young woman whose family was well known and respected. When she became pregnant outside of marriage, her condition caused a scandal that rippled through the tight-knit community. Her parents were furious and demanded to know who was responsible for bringing such shame upon their family. At first, the young woman refused to reveal the father's identity. She was protecting someone she loved, someone whose reputation and future would be destroyed if the truth came out. But as her parents' anger intensified and the pressure became unbearable, she made a desperate decision. In a moment of panic and confusion, she pointed to the one person she thought could weather this storm better than her actual lover, the respected Master Hakuin. When her outraged parents confronted the Zen master with their daughter's accusation, they expected protests of innocence, explanations, or at least some expression of shock at being falsely accused. Instead, Hakuin listened calmly to their angry words and simply replied, "Is that so?" His response only seemed to confirm their worst suspicions. Surely, an innocent man would defend himself more vigorously. The scandal exploded throughout the village. People who had revered Hakuin as a saint now whispered that he was a hypocrite who had been living a lie. His reputation was destroyed overnight, and former students abandoned him in disgust and disappointment. When the child was born, the parents brought the baby directly to Hakuin. "This is your responsibility now," they declared bitterly. "Since you are the father, you must take care of this child." They thrust the infant into his arms and walked away, leaving him to face the consequences of a crime he had never committed. Again, Hakuin simply said, "Is that so?" and accepted the baby without protest or explanation. For many months, the former master cared for the child with tender attention. He fed the infant, changed diapers, walked the floors during sleepless nights, and provided all the love and care that any devoted parent would give. Neighbors who had once brought him offerings of food and respect now ignored him or spoke of him with contempt. He had lost his position, his reputation, and his livelihood, but he continued to care for the child with peaceful dedication. Meanwhile, the young woman struggled with the weight of her lie. Watching the revered teacher suffer for her deception while caring lovingly for a child that wasn't his became unbearable. The guilt consumed her until she could no longer live with what she had done. Finally, she confessed the truth to her parents. The real father was a young man in the village whom she had been trying to protect. Her parents were horrified to learn what they had done to an innocent man. They rushed to Hakuin's simple dwelling with profuse apologies. "Master, we have wronged you terribly," they said, bowing deeply. "Our daughter has confessed that you are not the father. We know now that you have suffered unjustly for our mistake. Please forgive us and allow us to take the child back to its real family." Hakuin listened to their apologies with the same equanimity he had shown to their accusations. As he gently placed the baby in their arms, he offered the same response he had given throughout the entire ordeal. Is that so? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the profound power of maintaining inner equilibrium, regardless of how others perceive us or what circumstances life presents. Why do we allow external events and other people's opinions to determine our inner state? Zen Buddhism teaches that true freedom comes from developing an unshakable center that remains stable, whether we're being praised or blamed, honored or dishonored, treated fairly or unjustly. Hakuin's response is that so represents a profound spiritual practice. He wasn't being indifferent or passive. He was demonstrating the ultimate non-attachment to reputation, status, and even justice itself. His consistent response showed that his sense of worth and purpose came from within, rather than from external validation. Consider how differently most of us would react to false accusations, public humiliation, and complete loss of reputation. The natural human response is to defend ourselves, to fight against injustice, to demand that others see the truth. But Hakuin's approach reveals another possibility, meeting all circumstances with the same peaceful acceptance. This doesn't mean we should never defend ourselves or that we should passively accept all injustices. Hakuin's teaching is more subtle. He shows us that our inner peace doesn't have to depend on external circumstances being fair or favorable. We can maintain our center regardless of how the world treats us. The Buddha taught, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." Hakuin's equanimity protected him from the occupation, the additional suffering that would have come from resentment, self-pity, or desperate attempts to restore his reputation. While the situation was undoubtedly challenging, he didn't compound the difficulty with emotional resistance. Look deeply at your own reactions to criticism, misunderstanding, or unfair treatment. How much of your suffering comes from the actual events, and how much comes from your mental and emotional responses to those events? Hakuin's example suggests that we have far more control over the second source of suffering than the first. Tonight, as you encounter whatever judgments, misunderstandings, or unfair treatments life may bring, can you remember Master Hakuin's peaceful, "Is that so?" Can you find the space between what happens to you and how you respond? Discovering that your inner peace need not be held hostage by external circumstances. Buddha's wisdom teaches us peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. True spiritual development isn't measured by how well life treats us, but by how gracefully we can meet whatever life brings, maintaining our compassion, dignity, and inner tranquility, regardless of whether the world recognizes our worth or understands our true nature. Now let us explore a story about the paradoxical nature of spiritual seeing and the limits of conceptual understanding. This is the teaching of 3 strikes and deeper vision. In the mountain monastery, where the 6th patriarch Huisnung taught, students came from across China to study with the master whose realization was said to surpass all others of his time. Among these seekers was a brilliant young monk named Shen Hui, known for his sharp intellect and probing questions. Unlike many students who approached the patriarch with humble requests for basic instruction, Shen Hui often challenged the master with sophisticated philosophical inquiries. One afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed through the monastery windows and the air carried the peaceful sounds of monks going about their daily practice, Shen Hui found the 6th patriarch sitting quietly in the main hall. The master's posture was perfectly still, his breathing soft and natural, his expression serene yet alert, the embodiment of meditation in action. Seeing an opportunity to test his understanding against the master's realization, Shen Hui approached with a question that had been forming in his mind during his own meditation practice. The nature of perception during spiritual practice had become a source of great curiosity and confusion for him. "Hi, Master," Shen Hui said, bowing respectfully, but speaking with the confidence of someone who believed his question particularly insightful. "When you sit in meditation, do you see or not?" To Shen Hui, this seemed like a perfectly reasonable inquiry into the mechanics of enlightened awareness. Did awakened consciousness involve special kinds of seeing? Did meditation reveal mystical visions or higher perceptions unavailable to ordinary minds? Or did true realization transcend seeing altogether, existing in some pure state beyond sensory experience? What he received in response was completely unexpected. Without warning, the 6th patriarch picked up his wooden teaching stick and struck Shen Hui 3 times in rapid succession. Not gently, but with enough force that the blows stung sharply and left the young monk both physically uncomfortable and mentally bewildered. "When I hit you," the patriarch asked, with the same calm tone one might use to discuss the weather, "does it hurt or not?" Shen Hui rubbed his smarting shoulders, his mind racing to understand what had just occurred. The question seemed simple enough, yet something about the context made him suspect that a straightforward answer might be inadequate. The physical sensation was undeniable, yet the spiritual implications felt complex. "It both does and does not hurt," he replied carefully, intuiting that the master was pointing towards some paradox beyond ordinary logic. "I both see and do not see," the 6th patriarch responded, his words carrying the weight of direct experience rather than philosophical speculation. But Shen Hui's intellect wasn't satisfied with paradox. He needed to understand the mechanics to categorize and explain this teaching in terms his conceptual mind could grasp. "How can you both see and not see?" he pressed, genuine confusion evident in his voice. "That seems contradictory. Either you see during meditation or you don't. How can both be true simultaneously?" The patriarch's response came with the patience of someone who had spent decades helping students move beyond the limitations of dualistic thinking. "What I see," he explained with gentle clarity, "are the waverings and wanderings of my own mind. What I do not see is the right and wrong, and good and bad of other people. This is my seeing and not seeing. With these words, the entire teaching crystallized. The master wasn't speaking about mystical visions or transcendent states, but about the fundamental shift in perception that accompanies genuine spiritual maturity. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This teaching relates profoundly to the patriarch's lesson about the nature of awakened seeing. Why do we become confused when spiritual teachings transcend ordinary logic? Zen Buddhism explains that our conceptual mind operates through dualistic categories, seeing or not seeing, pain or no pain, right or wrong. But enlightened awareness doesn't eliminate these experiences. It transforms our relationship to them. The deeper teaching here shows us what authentic spiritual perception actually involves. The patriarch sees his own mental processes clearly, the arising and passing of thoughts, emotions, and reactions. This isn't a mystical power, but the natural result of sustained mindfulness practice. He observes the waverings and wanderings of consciousness without being lost in them. Simultaneously, he doesn't see in the judgmental sense imposing categories of right and wrong, good and bad onto others' behavior. This non-seeing isn't ignorance, but wisdom, recognizing that such judgments often say more about the observer than the observed. Look deeply at your own patterns of perception. How much of what you think you see in others actually reflects your own mental projections? When someone irritates you, are you seeing their actual behavior clearly, or are you seeing your own triggers and reactions? When someone impresses you, are you recognizing their genuine qualities, or are you seeing your own desires for approval or achievement? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between reactive perception and clear seeing. Reactive perception involves our past conditioning, our emotional needs, our judgmental habits. Clear seeing involves awareness that recognizes its own processes while remaining open to what's actually present. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. This teaching points to the same insight the patriarch offered. True seeing involves turning attention toward our own mental processes, rather than fixating on external judgments and evaluations. The 3 strikes Shen Hui received weren't punishment, but skillful teaching. Physical pain that both does and does not hurt points toward the mystery of conscious experience itself. Pain arises in awareness, is felt fully, yet doesn't define or limit the awareness that experiences it. Similarly, thoughts and emotions arise in consciousness without contaminating its essential clarity. Consider how this teaching might transform your daily experience. Instead of constantly evaluating others' behavior, finding fault, making comparisons, generating opinions, what if you turned that same attention toward observing your own mental reactions? What patterns would you discover in the wanderings and waverings of your own mind? This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our capacity for discernment. Rather, we develop the ability to respond from clarity rather than reactivity. When we see our own judgmental tendencies clearly, we naturally become less caught in them. When we observe our mental projections, we're less likely to mistake them for objective reality. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called mirror mind, awareness that reflects whatever arises without being stained or changed by it. This mirror sees everything clearly while maintaining its essential emptiness and openness. Tonight, as you notice your mind categorizing and judging the experiences of your day, can you remember the patriarch's teaching? Can you turn your attention toward the seer rather than constantly evaluating what is seen? Can you discover the freedom that comes from seeing your own mental processes without being enslaved by them? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." By learning to see our own mental patterns with compassion rather than judgment, we develop the clarity to see others with equal kindness and understanding. Let us continue on our journey with a story about discovering the source of true freedom. This is the tale of the student and the master's heart. In a peaceful monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted like snow, a young student approached his teacher during evening meditation. The master sat beneath an ancient maple tree, twilight painting the sky in soft purples and golds. This student had been practicing earnestly for years, yet lately, questions had been arising that reached deeper than formal instruction. Taking a seat beside his teacher, the student gathered courage to voice what had been troubling him. "Master," he began quietly, "when I was young, I had a deep desire for my family and loved ones to be proud of me. I wanted to excel in studies, to accomplish things that would make them beam with joy. Were you ever the same way?" The master turned his gentle gaze toward the student, seeing in the young man's eyes the same earnest longing that had once driven his own seeking. After contemplative silence, he replied simply, "Yes, I was very much the same." The student felt relief at this admission. "Why did you desire their pride so intensely?" he asked. "What was driving that need for approval?" The master smiled with tender recognition. "I wanted them to feel they had more reason to love and accept me," he said thoughtfully. "If I could make them proud, surely their love would be secure and abundant. But the reason I desired this went even deeper." The student leaned closer, sensing they were approaching something essential. "I sought their love so desperately," the master continued, "because I, in turn, would feel I had sufficient reason to love and accept myself. I was seeking permission from others to feel good about who I was. Their approval would be evidence of my worthiness, even to myself. That was what lay at the root of all my striving." The master paused, watching the first stars appear. But then, one day, I awakened to a revolutionary possibility. I realized I could ask myself a different question. What if I could bypass all external validation and simply learn to love and accept myself unconditionally? What if I didn't require anyone else's approval to feel genuinely good about my existence? The student felt something shift in his chest as these words settled. I imagined what it would be like if my happiness no longer depended on outer circumstances, on whether people approved or disapproved of my choices. What if my sense of worth could be as constant as my own heartbeat, independent of any external validation? The student could feel his teacher's words pointing toward a freedom he had never considered, and that realization began your quest for self-realization. Exactly, the master nodded. That was when my true spiritual journey began, not with seeking something outside myself, but with discovering what was already complete within. After contemplative silence, the student asked, "And did you never again desire their pride? Did that longing completely disappear?" The master chuckled softly. "Oh, my ego certainly continued to desire approval. Conditioned patterns don't vanish overnight, but something fundamental had shifted in my relationship to those desires. I no longer completely identified with my ego as I had before. He gestured toward the darkening garden where fireflies had begun their dance. I learned to see those approval-seeking thoughts as passing phenomena, like these fireflies appearing and disappearing. I could observe them with interest and compassion, but I no longer gave them power to determine my worth. "So, you still cared what others thought?" the student asked. "I respected their opinions and honored their perspectives," the master replied. "But I no longer gave them so much weight. Their approval became like weather, sometimes pleasant, sometimes not, but no longer the determining factor in whether I felt at peace with myself." The master's face radiated quiet joy, and never had I felt so free as when I finally released myself in this way. It was like discovering I had been carrying invisible chains for decades, and suddenly they fell away. The love I had been seeking outside was revealed to have been within me all along. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you truly loved yourself, you would never hurt yourself with destructive thoughts, actions, or choices. This teaching points to the heart of the master's discovery. Most suffering stems from the mistaken belief that we must earn the right to love ourselves through external achievements or approval. Here we discover one of the most revolutionary insights available. Self-love is not a reward to be earned, but our natural birthright to be claimed. We are born complete and worthy not because of what we accomplish, but simply because we exist. Why do we find unconditional self-love so difficult? From childhood, we absorb messages suggesting love must be earned through good behavior, achievement, or pleasing others. We learn to treat ourselves the way we were treated, often with criticism and conditions. These patterns become so familiar that unconditional self-acceptance feels foreign. Our culture intensifies this conditioning by promoting the myth that happiness comes from external sources. Each message reinforces the delusion that we are incomplete as we are. Consider how much mental energy goes toward managing others' opinions. How often do you modify authentic expression to gain approval? How much self-worth depends on external feedback rather than internal recognition of inherent value? When we love ourselves unconditionally, we create a foundation of fulfillment that allows us to enjoy others' affection without depending on it. We can receive compliments with gratitude rather than desperate hunger, and handle criticism without devastation because our core worth remains untouched. The Buddha said, "You can search throughout the entire universe for someone more deserving of your love and affection than you are yourself. And that person is not to be found anywhere. You yourself deserve your love and affection." This isn't narcissism. It's recognition of a fundamental truth about consciousness itself. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's quiet, can you sense the presence that is reading these words? This awareness that knows your thoughts and witnesses your experiences is not improved or diminished by anything that happens. It remains constant and clear like space itself. What would it be like to treat this aware presence with the tenderness it deserves? Perhaps you could offer yourself the same patience you'd give a beloved child learning, or the same compassion you'd feel for a friend in difficulties. As the Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. Self-criticism is never healed by more self-criticism. Only by learning to love ourselves exactly as we are do we create inner conditions for authentic transformation. In discovering this unconditional love within, we find the freedom we sought through others' approval was always here, beating steadily in our own hearts. Let us continue our journey with a story about the transformative power of fearlessness and unconditional compassion. This is the tale of the thief and the Zen master. One quiet evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Zen master Shichiri Kojun sat in his simple home reciting ancient sutras. His voice flowed rhythmically through the peaceful rooms, each word a meditation, each breath a prayer. The soft glow of candlelight danced across the walls as he immersed himself completely in the sacred texts, finding deep tranquility in the familiar verses. Suddenly, the serenity was shattered. The front door burst open with a violent crash, and a desperate man entered, brandishing a sharp sword that gleamed menacingly in the candlelight. His eyes were wild with desperation, his clothes dirty and torn, his breathing heavy from running. He had clearly chosen this isolated house because he believed it would be an easy target. A peaceful monk would offer no resistance. "Money or your life?" the thief demanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and aggression. He expected the old man to cower, to plead, to scramble frantically for whatever valuables he might have hidden away. But Shichiri didn't even look up from his sutra book. His voice remained calm and steady as he continued reciting for a moment before pausing to address the intruder. "Please don't disturb my practice," he said, with the same gentle tone he might use to ask someone to close a door. "If you need money, help yourself. It's in that drawer over there." He gestured casually toward a simple wooden chest, then immediately returned to his recitation, as if nothing unusual had occurred. The thief stood frozen, his sword still raised, completely bewildered. In all his years of stealing, he had never encountered such a reaction. No fear, no pleading, no anger, just matter-of-fact helpfulness, as if he were a neighbor who had stopped by to borrow something. Shaking his head in confusion, but proceeding with his business, the thief moved to the indicated drawer and began gathering the coins and small valuables he found there. The soft sound of the master's voice continued behind him, reciting sacred words as peacefully as if he were alone. Just as the thief was preparing to leave with his stolen goods, the master's voice called out again. "Wait," Shichiri said, finally looking up from his book. "Please don't take everything. I need some of that money to pay my taxes tomorrow. Leave a little for me, won't you?" The thief stared at him in amazement. Here was a man who was being robbed, calmly negotiating the terms of his own robbery, as if they were conducting normal business. Almost without thinking, the thief returned some of the money to the drawer. As he turned to leave, certain that this strange encounter was finally over, the master's voice stopped him once more. "You took my money," Shichiri called out, his tone carrying a note of reproach, "and you didn't even thank me. That's quite rude, don't you think?" This final comment left the thief completely speechless. His sword hand began to shake. Never in his most violent encounters had he been so thoroughly unnerved. Here was a man who treated robbery as if it were a favor, who was more concerned about politeness than personal safety. "Thank you," the thief stammered, and then fled into the night as quickly as his legs would carry him. Later, when the thief was caught and confessed to numerous crimes, including the incident at Shichiri's house, the master was called as a witness. The court officials expected him to demand justice, to describe the terror and violation he had experienced. Instead, Shichiri spoke with the same calm clarity he had shown that evening. "This man did not steal anything from me," he testified. "I gave him the money freely. He even thanked me for it, though it took a little reminding." The thief, sitting in chains, felt something break open in his chest as he heard these words. This man had not only shown him extraordinary kindness in the moment of the crime, but was now protecting him from the consequences. For the first time in years, tears came to his eyes. Not tears of self-pity or anger, but tears of recognition. He had encountered something he had never experienced before: love without conditions. Upon his release from prison, the former thief sought out the master and begged to become his student. Under Shichiri's patient guidance, he learned to cultivate the same fearless compassion he had witnessed that night. Years later, through dedicated practice and the master's unwavering belief in his potential for transformation, he attained the deep peace and wisdom of enlightenment. As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the revolutionary power of meeting violence with absolute peace, responding to taking with giving, and answering fear with love. Why do we instinctively believe that force must be met with force, that aggression requires defensive reaction? Zen Buddhism reveals that this pattern, while natural, often perpetuates the very conflicts it seeks to resolve. When we respond to hostility with hostility, we simply escalate the cycle of suffering. But when we respond with genuine compassion, not passive submission but active love, we create space for transformation that wouldn't otherwise exist. Look deeply at your own experience. When someone approaches you with anger, criticism, or demand, what is your automatic response? Most of us immediately mobilize our defenses, preparing to protect ourselves through counterattack or withdrawal. But notice what happens in your body and mind during these defensive reactions. Does the tension decrease or increase? Does the conflict resolve or intensify? Shichiri's response demonstrates what Zen calls skillful means, acting from wisdom rather than reflex. His fearlessness didn't come from being unaware of danger, but from understanding something profound about the nature of reality. He recognized that the thief's aggression arose from desperation and suffering, not from inherent evil. By refusing to see him as an enemy, Shichiri created the possibility for the thief to see himself differently. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called the courage of defenselessness. This doesn't mean being naive about genuine danger or allowing ourselves to be harmed unnecessarily. Rather, it means developing the confidence to respond to difficult situations from our highest wisdom rather than our most primitive instincts. The Buddha taught, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Shichiri embodied all three in his encounter with the thief. He lived from complete presence, loved without conditions, and let go of any attachment to his possessions or even his personal safety. Consider the people in your life who challenge you: the difficult colleague, the critical family member, the aggressive driver in traffic. What would it mean to meet their energy with the same kind of fearless compassion Shichiri showed? Not by agreeing with them or submitting to their demands, but by refusing to match their level of reactivity, by staying connected to your own center of peace, regardless of their behavior. Tonight, as you encounter your own moments of tension or conflict, can you remember the master who treated a robber as an honored guest? Can you find the space between stimulus and response where choice lives, where you can decide to meet aggression with peace, taking with giving, fear with love? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most powerful response to violence is simply to remain unshakable in our commitment to compassion. knowing that love has a transformative power that force can never match. Now let us explore a Zen story about the irreplaceable nature of direct spiritual transmission. This is the tale of Bankei and the messenger. In the bustling capital city where merchants haggled in crowded marketplaces and scholars debated in tea houses, the renowned Zen master Bankei had completed another period of teaching at one of the great temples, known throughout the region for his profound insight and ability to point students directly toward their Buddha nature. Bankei maintained a simple practice of traveling between temples, offering instruction wherever sincere students gathered. As the master prepared to depart for his next destination, carefully folding his few possessions into a traveling bundle, a well-dressed gentleman approached him with urgent politeness. The man's fine silk robes and careful manner suggested someone accustomed to moving in aristocratic circles, likely a retainer or aide to one of the noble families that supported the temple. "Venerable master," the gentleman said, bowing deeply, "I come with a request from the Baron, a man of great learning and sincere interest in your teachings. He has heard of your wisdom and wishes desperately to meet with you personally, but urgent matters have detained him today. Would you consider postponing your departure by one day so that he might have the honor of studying with you tomorrow?" Bankei, despite his eagerness to reach the next temple where students awaited him, recognized the genuine need in the request. The path of a teacher required flexibility and compassion even when inconvenient. "Of course," he replied simply, "I shall remain one more day." The master unpacked his bundle and settled back into the temple quarters, spending the evening in quiet meditation and preparation for what he anticipated would be a meaningful encounter with a sincere seeker. He had met many nobles over the years who approached Zen with genuine humility despite their worldly status, and he looked forward to offering whatever guidance might be helpful. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the sound of temple bells calling the community to meditation. Bankei waited in his designated meeting room as the appointed time approached, but instead of the Baron himself, the same well-dressed gentleman appeared again, this time with obvious embarrassment written across his features. "Master," the man began, his voice heavy with apology, "I bring regrettable news. The Baron was called away on urgent business that could not be delayed, matters of state that demanded his immediate attention. However, he has not forgotten his desire for your teaching. He has asked me to serve as his representative, to receive your instruction on his behalf, and carry your wisdom back to him faithfully." The gentleman paused, clearly hoping this arrangement would prove acceptable. The Baron's specific question concerns the nature of mind itself. He wishes to understand what is the true nature of consciousness, and how can one realize it directly. If you would share your teaching on this matter, I promise to convey every word exactly as you speak it. Bankei listened to this request with gentle attention, his expression remaining calm and compassionate. When the gentleman finished speaking, the master sat quietly for a moment, as if considering not just the question, but the entire situation, the absent seeker, the well-intentioned messenger, and the profound impossibility of what was being asked. Finally, Bankei spoke with characteristic simplicity and directness. This matter of Zen is difficult to convey even through direct question and answer between teacher and student meeting face to face. It becomes all the more difficult, indeed impossible, to transmit through a messenger, no matter how sincere or capable that messenger might be. Having delivered this response, the master said nothing more. He simply sat in silence, embodying the very teaching he had just articulated. The gentleman waited, perhaps expecting elaboration or alternative suggestions, but none came. Eventually, finding himself speechless and somewhat confused, the gentleman bowed politely and withdrew from the temple. The Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." This profound truth reveals itself in Bankei's gentle but firm refusal to reduce Zen wisdom to a message that could be carried by proxy. Spiritual awakening cannot be transmitted second-hand because it is not information but transformation. Why do we often approach spiritual learning as if it were academic knowledge that can be collected and conveyed through intermediaries? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is not a concept to be understood, but a reality to be directly experienced. Like the taste of water to someone who is thirsty, it cannot be adequately described. It must be experienced firsthand. The Baron's question about the nature of consciousness reveals our typical approach to spiritual inquiry. We want to understand awareness intellectually, to grasp it conceptually, to possess it as knowledge. But consciousness cannot be made into an object of study because it is the very subject doing the studying. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The seeing itself is what you are trying to see. Consider how often throughout your day you might approach spiritual wisdom as information to be collected rather than truth to be embodied. We read books about meditation instead of meditating. We study descriptions of enlightenment instead of investigating our present experience. We seek answers about the nature of mind instead of directly examining what we call mind right now. Zen Master Dogen taught, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. This paradox points to the heart of why spiritual transmission requires direct engagement. The self that wants to understand Buddhism intellectually is the very construction that must be seen through. This seeing through happens not through accumulating knowledge, but through intimate investigation of immediate experience. The messenger in the story represents our own tendency to approach awakening indirectly. We want to understand consciousness from a safe distance, maintaining the illusion that we are separate observers, studying an object called awareness. But awareness is what we are, not what we have. It cannot be possessed, understood, or transmitted because we are expressions of it. Bankei's silence after his brief explanation was itself a teaching. In Zen, silence often conveys what words cannot. The gaps between thoughts, the space between breaths, the awareness in which all experiences arise. These cannot be captured in language, but can be directly recognized when we stop trying to grasp them conceptually. This doesn't mean spiritual teaching is impossible, or that teachers serve no purpose. Rather, it means that authentic teaching points students toward their own direct experience, rather than providing second-hand descriptions of someone else's realization. The teacher's role is not to deliver enlightenment, but to create conditions where students might recognize what they already are. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being conscious, aware of these words, aware of your body, aware of the space in which thoughts and sensations appear, can you investigate this awareness directly rather than through concepts? Can you be present to your experience rather than trying to understand it through someone else's descriptions? As the Buddha taught, work out your own salvation with diligence. The path to freedom cannot be walked by proxy. It requires your own feet, your own breath, your own willingness to look directly at what you have always been, but perhaps never clearly seen. Let us now turn to a tale of a young monk who believed he had failed in his spiritual journey. This is the story of the Golden Wake. At a peaceful monastery overlooking a serene mountain lake, a young student sat dejected on the temple steps as the sun began its descent toward the water. His shoulders sagged with the weight of disappointment, and his eyes reflected the heaviness in his heart. For months, he had struggled with his studies, unable to grasp the profound teachings that seemed to come so naturally to his fellow monks. "The boat is coming to take me home, because I have failed in my studies here at the monastery," he said to his teacher, who had quietly approached and sat beside him. "What can I say to my family? They sent me here with such hope, believing I would return as a learned monk who could guide others on the path." The old teacher gazed out at the lake where a small wooden boat was making its way slowly across the still water. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "Say that you did your best, and that is as much as anyone can do," he answered gently, his voice carrying the wisdom of many years. "But I wanted to be a famous monk and teach others," the boy replied, his voice thick with disappointment. "I dreamed of leading meditation sessions, of having students seek my guidance, of making a real difference in the world." "You can," the teacher said simply. "How?" asked the sad boy, looking at his teacher with confusion. "I couldn't even memorize the basic sutras. I fell asleep during meditation. I failed at everything that matters." The teacher smiled and pointed toward the water. "Live from your heart. I will show you. Do you see that boat making its way across the lake with the sun setting behind it?" "Yes," the boy replied, following his teacher's gaze. "Do you see its wake spreading across the lake? See how the boat looks like the apex of a golden triangle as the wake fans out from its bow." The boy squinted, trying to see what his teacher described. "Sort of," said the teacher patiently. "That boat is you. As you leave the monastery, the lake is your life. The wake is the effect that you will have on the world. Each ripple triggers another ripple, which triggers another. By constantly striving to live as wise and loving a life as you can teach the path of love to everyone you meet simply by being yourself. A few of these people will pass on your good example to others. Thus, the expanding golden wake of good works begets other good works. Most important, notice how each ripple catches the sun and bounces its light back to heaven." The boy watched in wonder as the simple boat continued its journey. The wake indeed forming an ever-widening triangle of light upon the water. Each small wave caught the golden sunlight and reflected it back toward the sky in countless sparkling points. "Would you come home with me and explain all of this to my father?" he asked the boy, hope beginning to kindle in his voice. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, a candle loses nothing by lighting another candle. The deeper teaching here shows us that influence spreads not through grand gestures or perfect knowledge, but through the simple authenticity of a heart committed to goodness. Why do we believe that only formal credentials or recognized achievements qualify us to make a meaningful impact? Zen Buddhism points to our attachment to external validation and our misunderstanding of how wisdom actually transmits from person to person. We imagine that teaching requires a podium, a title, or a certificate, when in reality, the most profound lessons are shared through the quality of our presence and the integrity of our actions. Consider how often throughout your day you encounter people who touch your life, not through their expertise, but through their kindness, their patience, or their simple human warmth. The grocery store clerk who greets you with genuine care, the stranger who offers directions with a smile, the friend who listens without judgment. These people create ripples that extend far beyond their awareness. In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unconscious teaching. This is the natural transmission that occurs when we align our actions with our deepest values. Like the boat on the lake, we may not see our wake, but it spreads inevitably behind us, touching shores we never knew existed. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." Happiness never decreases by being shared. Each moment of authentic living becomes a teaching. Each act of compassion creates ripples. Each choice to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity sends light back toward heaven. Tonight, as you reflect on your own journey, can you see the golden wake you're already creating? Perhaps it's in the patience you show a difficult family member, the encouragement you offer a struggling colleague, or the simple presence you bring to everyday encounters. The light you reflect may be illuminating paths you've never imagined. Let us now turn to a story about the deceptive nature of appearances and the masks we wear in seeking acceptance. This is the tale of the hungry abbot and the generous robe. In a bustling merchant quarter of an ancient Chinese city, where silk traders and wealthy families built elaborate houses behind high walls, there lived a man whose prosperity was known throughout the region. His mansion boasted carved jade doorways, courtyards filled with exotic birds, and servants who attended to every detail of daily life. This man took great pride in his position and was particular about maintaining his reputation among other prominent citizens. One morning, as autumn rain fell steadily on the cobblestone streets, a figure approached his ornate front gate. The visitor was a Zen abbot from a mountain monastery, but he appeared as nothing more than a beggar. His simple brown robes were patched and worn thin from years of use. His sandals were cracked and muddy from walking mountain paths, and his wooden begging bowl showed the stains and scratches of countless meals received in charity. The abbot stood quietly at the gate, rain dripping from his shaved head, and waited with the patient dignity that comes from years of spiritual practice. When the gatekeeper finally noticed him, the man's expression immediately showed disdain. "What do you want, beggar?" The gatekeeper asked harshly, not bothering to bow or show any respect. "This is the house of an important man. We have no scraps for wanderers. I am traveling and seeking alms," the abbot replied gently. "Perhaps your master would offer a simple meal to a monk." The gatekeeper looked him up and down with obvious contempt. These ragged clothes, this worn appearance, clearly, this was just another vagrant, trying to take advantage of his master's household. "Be gone," he commanded. "My master does not waste food on beggars. Seek your charity elsewhere." The abbot accepted this rejection without anger or argument. He simply bowed, turned, and walked back into the rain, his empty bowl tucked beneath his arm. Several hours later, as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, the same figure returned to the same gate, but now everything had changed. The abbot wore his formal ceremonial robes, rich golden silk embroidered with intricate patterns, a magnificent purple sash across his shoulders, and prayer beads carved from precious wood. His bearing remained humble, but his appearance now spoke unmistakably of high spiritual rank and monastery wealth. This time, when the gatekeeper saw him approaching, his entire demeanor transformed. "Welcome, honored master," he exclaimed, bowing deeply. Please enter. My master will be so pleased to receive such a distinguished visitor." The rich man himself hurried out to greet the abbot personally. offering elaborate bows and flowery words of welcome. "Venerable Sir, what an honor for our humble household. You must join us for our finest meal. Please allow us to serve you." They ushered the abbot into their most elegant dining room, where servants quickly prepared a sumptuous feast. Delicate fish, perfectly seasoned vegetables, fragrant rice, and sweet desserts filled the low table. The rich man sat opposite the abbot, beaming with pride at his ability to host such an important religious figure. As the first course was served, the abbot did something completely unexpected. Instead of eating, he carefully removed his beautiful ceremonial robe and folded it with great attention. Then, with deliberate precision, he placed the folded robe directly in front of the feast, as if it were the honored guest. Standing up with quiet dignity, the abbot spoke clearly, so all present could hear. "This meal is not for me. It is for the robe." Without another word, he walked out of the house, leaving behind both the magnificent feast and the rich man's stunned realization of his own superficial judgment. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, "Judge not by appearances. A rich heart may be under a poor coat." Here we discover how our fixation on external appearances creates barriers to genuine human connection and spiritual understanding. Why do we judge others so quickly based on their clothing, status symbols, or outward presentation? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned mind's habit of creating categories and hierarchies based on surface appearances. This mental shortcut allows us to feel we understand people without the more challenging work of seeing their true nature. The rich man's household represents a pattern we all recognize in ourselves. How differently do we treat the well-dressed stranger versus the poorly dressed one? How does our attention change when someone mentions their impressive job title versus their humble occupation? How does our respect shift when we learn someone's wealth or poverty? This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to project worth onto external symbols rather than recognizing the inherent dignity of every person. The abbot remained exactly the same person in both encounters, his wisdom, compassion, and spiritual realization unchanged by his clothing. Yet the household's treatment of him transformed completely based solely on appearances. Look deeply at your own patterns of judgment. Perhaps you find yourself making assumptions about people in expensive cars versus old vehicles, designer clothes versus thrift store finds, prestigious addresses versus modest neighborhoods. Each of these judgments reveals how we've been conditioned to equate external appearance with internal worth. The story points us towards a fundamental question about authenticity. If we receive different treatment based on our presentation, which version of ourselves is real? Are we the person in casual clothes running errands, or the person dressed professionally for important meetings? Are we the one seeking help, or the one offering it? In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called original face, the authentic self that exists beneath all roles, costumes, and presentations. This original face doesn't change whether we're wearing rags or ceremonial robes, whether others treat us with respect or dismissal. Zen Master taught, "Your original face is not born and does not die." This teaching invites us to recognize that our essential nature, our capacity for awareness, love, and wisdom remains constant regardless of how others perceive us or how we present ourselves to the world. The abbot's teaching was not just for the rich man, but for all of us who might witness his story. By feeding the robe instead of himself, he revealed how often we relate to people's personas rather than their essence. We honor the title, the clothing, the symbols of status, while missing the actual human being present before us. Consider how this insight might transform your daily interactions. The server at your restaurant, the clerk at the store, the person asking for directions, each carries the same essential dignity as the most honored guest. The challenge is seeing past the uniforms, the circumstances, the social roles to the original face beneath. This doesn't mean we ignore practical realities or social conventions, but that we hold them more lightly. We can acknowledge someone's professional role while remembering their fundamental humanity. We can dress appropriately for occasions while knowing our worth doesn't depend on our wardrobe. Tonight, as you consider the various roles and presentations you inhabit throughout the day, can you sense the unchanging awareness that witnesses all these temporary costumes? Can you feel the original face that remains constant whether others see you as important or invisible? The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The abbot's silent gesture spoke more powerfully than lengthy sermons about equality and compassion. By walking away from the feast prepared for his appearance rather than his essence, he offered a teaching that continues to resonate across centuries. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to trust life's current. This is the story of the Crystal River. In the depths of a great crystal river, where water flowed clear as mountain air, there lived an entire village of small creatures. The river's current moved above them like a gentle breath, carrying the wisdom of countless springs and distant seas. Young and old, rich and poor, all made their home along the sandy bottom, each creature grasping tightly to stones, branches, and roots. For generations, clinging had been their way of survival. Every creature learned from birth to wrap their appendages around river rocks and fallen wood. "Hold on," the elders would say. "The current is dangerous. It will sweep you away to places unknown. Safety lies in staying exactly where you are." But one small creature grew weary of this endless grasping. Day after day, he watched the current flow overhead, seeing how it moved with such purpose and grace. While his neighbors complained about the effort required to maintain their grip, he found himself wondering what it might feel like to trust that flowing water. "I am tired of clinging," he announced one morning. "Though I cannot see where it leads, I trust that the current knows its destination. I shall let go and allow it to carry me where it will, for I fear that if I continue clinging, I shall die of boredom before I ever truly live." The other creatures gasped in horror. "Fool," they cried, "let go, and that current will tumble you mercilessly across the rocks below. You will be battered and broken, dying far more quickly than any boredom could kill you." But the small creature had made his decision. Taking one last look at his neighbors, he released his grip on the familiar stone. Immediately, the current seized him, and just as the others had predicted, he was tumbled and tossed across the rocky bottom. His small body struck stone after stone, each impact bringing pain he had never experienced while safely clinging. Yet something remarkable began to happen. As the creature continued to surrender to the current's power, refusing to grab for new anchors despite his pain, the water gradually lifted him higher from the dangerous bottom. The tumbling ceased. The rocks could no longer reach him. Now he flowed with the current itself, no longer fighting its direction, but becoming one with its movement. As he traveled downstream, creatures in distant parts witnessed something they had never seen. Here was one of their own kind, yet he appeared to be flying through the water, moving with the elegant power of the current itself. "See a miracle," they called out. a creature like ourselves, yet he soars. Surely he is the Messiah, come to save us all. The flowing creature heard their cries and felt compassion for their misunderstanding. I am no more Messiah than any of you, he called back. The river delights in lifting us all free, if only we dare to let go. Our true work is not clinging to the bottom, but embracing this voyage, this grand adventure of trust and flow. But the creatures only cried louder, Savior, Savior. Even as they spoke, they tightened their grips on rocks and roots. They watched until he disappeared around a bend, then began weaving legends about the miraculous Savior who had briefly graced their village. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound paradox at the heart of human experience. We spend our lives grasping for security and control, believing that our safety depends on holding tight to familiar circumstances. Yet in this very grasping, we create the suffering we seek to avoid. Why do we cling so desperately when the current offers to carry us toward unknown adventures? Zen Buddhism reveals that from early childhood, we learn the known is safe and the unknown dangerous. This conditioning becomes a spiritual obstacle when it prevents growth beyond familiar limitations. We also suffer from the illusion of control, believing that by grasping circumstances, relationships, and identities, we can stop the natural flow of change. This creates enormous tension because it puts us in opposition to reality itself. Life is constant movement, and when we resist this truth, we exhaust ourselves, fighting currents far more powerful than our individual will. Consider the areas of your life where you find yourself clinging. Perhaps it's a relationship that has outgrown its original form, a career that no longer brings joy, or an image of yourself that now constrains your growth. The current of change will flow whether we resist it or not. Our choice is whether to exhaust ourselves in futile opposition or discover the grace available in conscious surrender. The Buddha said, "Nothing is permanent except change. Water doesn't fight the mountainside. It finds the natural pathway down. When we learn to move with life's current rather than against it, we discover effortless effectiveness that rigid resistance can never achieve." Tonight, as you rest in this moment's stillness, what might you be ready to release? Perhaps it's a worry about tomorrow's challenges, a resentment from yesterday's disappointments, or a way of defining yourself that has grown too small. Can you feel into the current of this moment's aliveness and trust its direction? As the Buddha taught, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Relax right now and rest. In this trust, we discover that the current we feared would destroy us is actually the very force that can carry us home to our true nature. Now let us explore a story about the power of belief and the destiny we create through faith itself. This is the tale of the general and the coin that revealed truth. A Japanese general faced an impossible situation. His army was greatly outnumbered by enemy forces. The terrain favored his opponents, and by every conventional measure of military strategy, the coming battle should result in devastating defeat. Yet, something deep within him remained convinced that victory was possible. Perhaps it was intuition. Perhaps it was desperate hope. But he felt certain that his cause was just, and his troops, though fewer in number, possessed a fighting spirit that could overcome the odds. The problem was his soldiers. They could count as well as he could, and they had eyes to see the massive force arrayed against them. Fear rippled through their ranks like a contagion. Doubt clouded their faces, Whispered conversations filled with pessimism spread through the camp, and the general could sense that their morale was crumbling before the battle had even begun. He knew that an army convinced of its own defeat would indeed be defeated. Regardless of any other factors, technical skill, superior weapons, even numerical advantage means nothing when soldiers have already surrendered in their hearts. But an army that truly believed in its victory could accomplish seemingly impossible things through the sheer force of that conviction. On the morning of the battle, as they marched toward their destiny, the general led his troops to a small religious shrine that stood beside the road. This was a place where countless warriors had stopped over the centuries to pray before facing uncertain fate. The general gathered his men around him and led them in earnest prayer, asking for divine blessing and protection in the coming fight. When the prayers were finished, the general reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple coin. He held it high so that every soldier could see it clearly. "My brothers," he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled ranks, "we have prayed, and now we will let heaven itself reveal our destiny. I will toss this coin into the air. If it lands heads, we are fated to win this battle. If it lands tails, we are destined to lose. Let us discover what the gods have decided for us." The soldiers pressed closer, their breathing shallow with anticipation. Everything seemed to depend on this single moment, this one flip of metal spinning through the morning air. The general tossed the coin high, and every eye followed its arc as it rose, hung suspended for an instant against the sky, then fell back down to earth. The coin landed and lay still in the dust. It was heads. A cheer erupted from the troops that could probably be heard for miles. Soldiers who had been grim and fearful moments before now laughed with joy and embraced each other with renewed confidence. The gods had spoken. Victory was assured. Their cause was blessed by heaven itself. Filled with this divine confidence, the soldiers attacked their enemies with such fierce determination and coordinated power that they achieved exactly what the coin had predicted. Against all odds, they won a decisive victory, routing forces much larger than their own, and securing a triumph that would be remembered for generations. After the battle, as the general walked among his celebrating troops, his lieutenant approached him with wonder in his eyes. "General," the lieutenant said, "what an incredible thing. The coin revealed our true destiny, just as you said it would. Surely no human power can change what heaven has decreed." "You are absolutely right," the general replied with a knowing smile. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the coin, holding it so his lieutenant could examine it closely. "No one can change destiny." The lieutenant looked at the coin and gasped. Both sides showed heads. The Buddha once said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become." Here we discover the profound truth that destiny is not something that happens to us, but something we create through the power of our own beliefs and expectations. Why do we so readily assume that fate is beyond our influence, when our own minds play such a crucial role in shaping what unfolds? Zen Buddhism teaches that while we cannot control all external circumstances, we have tremendous power over the internal conditions that determine how we respond to whatever arises. The general understood something profound about human psychology and the nature of reality itself. He knew that his soldiers' belief in victory was more important than their numerical disadvantage. He recognized that confidence, determination, and fighting spirit could overcome superior numbers when those qualities were genuinely present. But here's the deeper teaching. The general didn't simply manipulate his troops through deception. He created the conditions that allowed their natural courage and strength to emerge. The soldiers possessed the ability to fight brilliantly all along. They simply needed to believe in themselves and their cause. Consider your own relationship with destiny and possibility. How often do you assume that outcomes are predetermined, that success or failure is beyond your influence? The general's two-headed coin represents the power we all possess to tip the scales in favor of positive outcomes through the quality of our engagement with life. This doesn't mean we can control everything through positive thinking or that believing in something makes it automatically true. The soldiers still had to fight the battle. They still had to demonstrate actual skill and courage, but their belief in victory created the psychological conditions that allowed their best qualities to manifest. In Zen practice, we learn to work skillfully with both effort and surrender, both intention and acceptance. We recognize that while we cannot dictate specific outcomes, we can profoundly influence the energy and attention we bring to any situation. This quality of engagement often determines whether we experience success or failure, regardless of external circumstances. Zen Master Hakuin taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The general was wise enough to see that his soldiers' thoughts about the battle were more influential than their thoughts about their numerical disadvantage. He worked with the reality of psychology rather than fighting against it. Look deeply at the various challenges and opportunities in your own life. Where might you be carrying a tails mentality, assuming defeat before you fully engage, focusing on obstacles rather than possibilities, letting fear determine your level of effort? And where might you need to create your own two-headed coin, a practice or a perspective that consistently orients you toward positive engagement, regardless of circumstances? The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This isn't magical thinking, but recognition of the creative power of consciousness itself. When we approach situations with genuine confidence, clarity, and commitment, we often discover capabilities we didn't know we possessed. Tonight, as you consider the battles you're facing and the outcomes you're hoping for, can you find your own version of the general's wisdom? Can you create internal conditions that support your highest possibilities rather than your deepest fears? Can you recognize that while you cannot control destiny, you have profound influence over the beliefs and attitudes that shape how destiny unfolds through you? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The general's confidence lit the flame of belief in every soldier's heart. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is create the conditions that allow others and ourselves to discover the strength that was there all along. As our time together draws to a quiet close, take a moment to notice the stillness that has found you. Can you feel how this deep calm is not something you had to build or acquire, but rather something you've simply allowed to surface? This tranquility you feel is your own inherent nature, a quiet reservoir that is always there waiting just beneath the surface of your thoughts. The Buddha once offered this gentle guidance. In the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. Reflect on this wisdom now. Each story we explored tonight was a quiet lesson in the art of letting go. releasing the grip of yesterday's regrets, tomorrow's anxieties, and the mind's endless chatter. This understanding has now been planted within you, a seed of awareness that will continue to grow long after these words have faded. This isn't about achieving a perfect state of mind, but about developing a new relationship with your own experience. Even if thoughts return, even if the world feels loud again tomorrow, remember the feeling you have right now. The lessons from these ancient masters have shown you a path back to this quiet center, a way of being that is always accessible. The peace you've touched is not a fleeting visitor. It is a permanent resident of your own awareness. As you prepare for deep and restorative sleep, know that the true teaching was not in the stories themselves, but in the quiet space they opened within you. It is in this inner stillness that clarity is found and the body and mind can truly heal. Carry this feeling of gentle release with you as you drift off. Let it be the foundation for your rest and the quiet strength that greets you in the morning. Thank you for joining us on this journey at my channel. Sleep well.